*6.
*6. So phone number ending in 451. Could you tell us who you are?
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. This is David Huff, City of Turlock. I'm just here for item 9D.
Thanks, David.
Might be 10D.
For City of Turlock, permit renewal. Just here if there's any questions.
Currently on the uncontested calendar.
Yep, that sounds correct.
And I've got you and Paul Bedore both on for that, just in case.
Just in case, so thank you. Good luck.
Okay. Are we ready?
Okay, we are recording and live on YouTube.
Very good. Today is Thursday, the 18th of February. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 573rd board meeting of the Central Valley Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I am Carl Longley, Chair of the Central Valley Water Board, and I'll introduce the other board members in just 1 minute. In order to comply with public gathering limitations and physical distancing requirements, and as authorized by the governor's executive orders, there is no physical meeting room. For people who only want to listen or watch the meeting, the board's customary webcast is available. In addition, we are receiving presentations and public comment through a Zoom meeting platform. If you intend to present or comment or think you might be interested in commenting, you should already be in the Zoom meeting room using the meeting ID provided on the board's website and the password you received from our staff. If you've not already received a password, you can email us now at, and I'll read this to you, agenda5, AGENDA 5 at waterboards.ca.gov. Once again, that email address is the word agenda, followed by the number 5 with no space. Then at waterboards.ca.gov. Include speaker comment, include the word speaker comment in the subject line so that we can follow up with you. For those in the Zoom meeting, you will be on mute and your camera turned off until it is your turn to speak. Our meeting host, Gene Coughlin from our IT team, will then unmute you and ask you to turn on your camera if you have one. When you are done speaking and the board members have completed asking questions, you will be placed on mute and your camera turned off. We appreciate your patience and understanding during this extraordinary time. I'll introduce the other board members now as follows. First off, the Vice Chair, Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Denise Cadera of Allensworth. Raji Brar of Bakersfield. Mark Bradford of Sacramento. Nick Abbott of Sacramento. Sean Yang of Sacramento. And finally, I am Carl Longley of Fresno. State Board Member Tam Dudek will be participating in this meeting, and she'll join us tomorrow. I'll now introduce the Executive Officer, Patrick Palupa, who will introduce his staff.
Good morning, Dr. Longley. I would also extend my warmest welcome to the 2 new board members who you just introduced. Both Nick and Sean were recently appointed by the governor. So this is their first board meeting sitting as board members of the Central Valley Water Board. So welcome aboard. We've got a number of very, very full items for your consideration today. And we definitely appreciate the service that you've taken on As members of the public and as board members well know, this is basically a volunteer position where there's a token stipend certainly given out to the board members, but it in no way reimburses them for the amount of time and energy that they put into these roles. So I really want to thank both Nick and Sean for stepping up and for their service. And again, also, I know Raji was reappointed shortly before last board meeting, but we'll appreciate your continued service on this board as well. So running through on today's agenda, we have myself, Patrick Lupa, Executive Officer of the Central Valley Water Board. I've got almost all of the Assistant Executive Officers participating in this call this morning. Assistant Executive Officer Clay Rogers runs our Fresno office. Assistant Executive Officers JJ Baum and Adam Lapitz are here in the Rancho Cordova office, and one of the few days that we are actually in the office, so most of us work from home most of the time. And Clint Snyder will be joining us a little bit later on this morning. He runs our Reading office, and this morning he is participating on a joint forest task force, the governor's forest task force. So vital function, obviously even more importance given this past fire season. So I figured it'd be good to have his voice in that conversation this morning, but he will be joining us in just a little bit. Also on the call today is Senior Attorney Jessica Yar and attorneys Bailey Toft-Dupuis and David Lancaster, all three of whom are from the Office of Chief Counsel and represent the Central Valley Water Board. And then we have a variety of staff on the call as well, but of particular note, I'd like to introduce Mindy Maxwell, who is gamely sitting in the boardroom today. She is the new executive assistant that we have recently hired on. She has come aboard just about the same time as Sean and Nick, so we'll be doing this thing together. We are very grateful for Mindy to come aboard with this organization. She's previously served in this capacity for a number of different other agencies and other entities. So really a lot of great experience that she brings to the table, and we've been really enthusiastic about her working through all of the issues that come with managing a board meeting. She will continue to be helped for this board meeting with Janelle Brown, who has so ably pitched in along with Christine Croyle and Kelly Garver in particular to kind of bridge the gap while we got Mindy hired up. So with that, we also have a number of senior managers and staff on the call today, but welcome everybody. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Dr. Longley.
Thank you very much. Raji, could you please lead?
In the flag salute, yes. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to agenda item number 2, board member communications. Do any board members have any communications, meetings they have attended and so forth? And I might add, I will give my communications tomorrow during the Friday meeting.
I'll do the same, Dr. Long.
Are there any other board member communications today?
I don't have any this time.
So hearing none, we'll wait for the for tomorrow.
Longley?
Yes.
If I may, I'm sorry. So I was invited to the Northern California Water Association meeting with Patrick related to announcing some strategic planning efforts of the board.
I think that's great. And that's your old stomping ground. So that's wonderful. You have knowledge of their issues up there, and I think it's great you'll be able to attend that meeting. Any further communications by board members?
Dr. Longley, I'll present mine tomorrow as well.
Thank you very much. We'll move to agenda item 3, which is the State Water Board liaison update. This item has been moved to Friday, and we'll hear it after agenda item 15 tomorrow. Moving to agenda item 4, the public forum. Janelle, do we have any one who has submitted an email requesting to speak on any topic which is not on the board's agenda today?
Not today, Dr. Longley.
Okay. We'll return to that tomorrow if anyone from the public who wishes to speak to us. We'll move next to the agenda item 5, the executive officer's report. The executive officer's report describes the many projects that the board is currently involved with. It involves case closures, enforcement actions, as well as planning and personnel matters. The executive officer is available to answer any questions that you may have of the matters discussed in the report. Board members, are there any questions? I hear none. I would like to say that given the issues that we've had with social distancing, difficulties in traveling, and such, I'm truly amazed at the progress that this board staff continue to make in fulfilling the board's mission. We'll have an opportunity tomorrow to discuss this further if necessary.
Yeah, certainly, Dr. Longley. I'll also add that tomorrow I'll fill you in on a little bit more that we're doing with respect to strategic planning, which is actually moving along after a brief pause due to the new social distancing rules that we experienced, about a year ago. I will say, and kind of discuss the calendar tomorrow, what we're planning on rolling out for you folks, as well as a little bit of funds that we got attached to a state water board contract that they didn't quite use up, believe it or not, because things like, travel has been curtailed this past year. So they found a little bit of pocket change that we've been able to hire a facilitator for a meeting that we're going to be having, a forum that we're going to be having in March regarding the strategic plan. I will say for everybody who is viewing this as a member of the public, the board is still soliciting input on its strategic planning effort. Over the past month and a half, I've never hesitated to kind of put that plug out there. Go to the board's website at just Google Central Valley Water Board. Right up on that front page, you'll see under the announcements a link to our strategic planning survey, which is a Survey Monkey tool that you can provide input. Any member of the public, any member of the staff, just about everybody except for the board members themselves, who will be kind of discussing these in detail, can provide input on what they want to see out of the Central Valley Water Board for the next 5 to 7 years. So a lot of information that we've been absorbing and digesting. That survey is open through the 22nd. I'll be discussing in a little bit more detail our plan, our timeline, our use of those state board resources over the next month or so, and then what we're staging before the board in April and then June, and then hopefully bringing to a conclusion in August. I also have a few Superior Accomplishment Awards. I think every single one of the awards that we will be giving out today really reflects folks who stepped up in a major way during the pandemic and really have been exemplary in terms of achieving their performance goals despite all the challenging circumstances that we have in the world today. So without further ado, I will begin with several Superior Accomplishment Awards. The first award is for the CV Salts Implementation Group. This group consists of Walt Plachta, Cindy Ah Yang, True Kang, Jenny Fuller, and Eric Warren. Walt and Eric are down in the Fresno office, and Cindy, True, and Jenny are all here in the Rancho Cordova office. Of course, just about all of them, office means working at home for the vast majority of the time. Last year, as the board well knows, the CV Salts Basin Plan amendments became effective and implementation commenced on a region-wide salt and nitrate control program. As a condition of the Basin Plan Amendment approval, State Board also directed staff to develop a Basin Plan Amendment to revise certain portions of the program within 12 months of the program's effective date. These simultaneous efforts have impacted almost every board program and have required a tremendous amount of coordination and oversight by the staff members receiving this award today. Staff working on the implementation effort poured through thousands of permittee records from the CWICS, which is our integrated water quality system database, to create a database that could be used for generating the notice to comply letters for both the salt and nitrate control programs. Those notice to comply letters really kicked off the program and started the efforts underway at thousands of facilities across the region. In addition, this team developed a variety of protocols, permit revisions, templates, and procedures to ensure a consistent and efficient rollout of the CV Salts program. Staff also participated in a multitude of meetings and provided timely follow-up to hundreds of phone calls, literally hundreds of phone calls poured in, and emails from both internal and external stakeholders. At the December 2020 board hearing, revisions to the CV Salts program were adopted by the Central Valley Water Board, thus meeting the deadline set by the State Water Board. Walt, Cindy, True, Jenny, and Warren are valued staff members of the Central Valley Water Board and have been critical to the success of the CV Salts program. The CV Salts program could not have met its goals, which are really ambitious, set even before the pandemic, and milestones without their hard work and dedication. We are fortunate to have them working at the Central Valley Water Board, and they are well deserving of this award. And I really want to commend everybody. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of follow-up, and I think it's tough sometimes to maintain that high level of customer service when you're both working under extremely tight deadlines and you're in the middle of this global pandemic that everybody's dealing with. Walt, Cindy, True, Jenny, and Eric, they were tremendous in this effort. I'll also add that their boss, Ann Walters, did a tremendous job orchestrating their work over the past year, and Adam pitching in to offer his expert advice as well, as are all kind of part of the big CV Salts implementation team. But these 5 individuals really went above and beyond, starting 2 massive programs. And the salt control program and the nitrate control program are really tough, even under the most optimal circumstances. And this team found a way to get it done, even with the circumstances that we're under right now. So I truly congratulate them for this award. I do regret that we can't sit around and take some pictures and celebrate in the way we usually do for these awards, but that will certainly be waiting once conditions sort of return to normal.
Patrick, I would like to join you in congratulating those folks. Staff has been unbelievably proficient in getting this program underway. This is a historic program, and I'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow, but it is a historic program. As you know, I'm highly involved in SALT in many forms, and I get a lot of questions about the work these folks have done in the program that they've been created. From other states, people looking to do something similar to what we have done here in California. We wouldn't have done it without the fine work of these folks.
Patrick, are they online right now?
Few of them are. I think they'll be listening on the YouTube channel, I think is where most of them are right now.
Well, I guess I'll just, for whoever's listening, having good service and friendly people who are energetic and sort of showed how much they care really goes a long way in solving issues. So, I know that there's a lot of technical work involved, but the personal touches just carry us so far. And I appreciate that. Whenever I get questions about the board, it makes me feel really comfortable knowing that when I refer them to people on staff at Region 5, they're always going to be helpful and friendly. So, it's not always in the job description, but we're really glad that we have you guys on board. So thank you and congratulations.
Fantastic. I have 3 more individual awards in addition to the group award to hand out. Next up, and this one is close to my heart, Janelle Brown. This Superior Accomplishment Award is awarded to Janelle Brown, whose tireless dedication in so many areas has helped the Central Valley Water Board maintain excellence in board meeting preparation, the production of multiple virtual board meetings in 2020, the production of the Executive Officers Report, which we just mentioned, compliance with ADA specifications for applicable documents, and her coordination of many lab sampling events for the Rancho Cordova office. The truth is that Janelle can receive the SSA based on her incredible work ethic and high capacity to achieve alone. But Janelle excels at so much more. Her work product is superior, her sense of pride and dedication to her work is off the charts, and Janelle is continuously searching for ways to improve her work product in every area. And this is written by her supervisor. I believe I can speak for Kelly Garver, Patrick Palupa, and the entire executive management group when I state that Janelle has been an incredibly valuable asset for the Central Valley Water Board during this challenging year of 2020, and by all means you can. It gets overstated, but the phrase wouldn't have been as successful without Janelle speaks volumes of truth. The virtual board meeting success would also be less so without Janelle's valuable contributions in this area. Additionally, the value Janelle has brought to being a guru of ADA, that's American Disability Act compliance, has been enormously beneficial to the Region 5's Rancho Cordova office. She has trained multiple staff on how to make their documents ADA compliant. Also, Janelle's incredible lab background has enabled her to continue to be an asset for the Central Valley Water Board's program areas who use this lab contract to test on a routine basis. Moreover, much of Janelle's work over the past year has meant doing new tasks and stepping into to help Region 5 function smoothly. Without Janelle's ability to do this, Region 5 would not have enjoyed the same success. In conclusion, Janelle's incredible work effort, work ethic, and positive attitude has been critical to the success of the virtual board meetings, EO reports, ADA work, and lab sampling events for Region 5. We are very fortunate to have Janelle working at the Central Valley Water Board, and she is well deserving of this award. For me, it's incredible because I enjoy working with Janelle so much. She's got a high level of professionalism. And, you know, as this award brings up, I sometimes even forget that she also manages the lab that we have here in this office. So it's an incredible amount of work that she does. And the fact that she consistently delivers such a high value, high product, along with her concierge services to the board members, truly exceptional. And I really want to extend my thanks to her and congratulations for this award.
Thank you so much.
And certainly, Janelle, working with you during the past year, you've been invaluable, and I greatly appreciate what you have done for the staff and the board members in making the board function during this very difficult time. Thank you again.
Yeah, and I would just add that the work has seemed seamless for us with her being there to fill that gap at an extraordinary time. A fabulous job, and to all the staff for the wonderful work that you do. Congratulations.
Denise, thank you so much.
All right, next up is Mike Nielsen from the Reading office. Mike Nielsen is a water resource control engineer working in the NPDES unit of the Central Valley Water Board's Reading office. Mike manages a complex and demanding caseload of wastewater treatment plants. The Central Valley Water Board is happy to select Mike for the Superior Accomplishment Award for his excellent work. Specifically, his efforts in resolving a long-standing enforcement case, overseeing multiple wastewater treatment plant project upgrades, and his contribution to high-level programmatic work. Mike spent more than a year working with a small city through settlement negotiations to resolve permit violations, including a substantial $2 million plus or 2 million gallon plus sewage spill from their collection system, as well as numerous effluent limitations subject to mandatory minimum penalties. The result of Mike's effort was a settlement package with a total liability exceeding $1 million, with some money going to repairs of the city's collection system, some to upgrades of the wastewater treatment plant, and some to the State Water Board's pollution cleanup and abatement account. The issue was settled in October of 2020. Additionally, Mike is doing a tremendous job ushering along several wastewater treatment plant project upgrades. One particular example is a small city that unexpectedly faced a significant construction funding shortfall in 2020. But thanks to Mike's persistence, quick action, and good working relationship with the city and the State Board Division of Financial Assistance, the city was able to receive an additional $2 million in grant funding and a reduction in the interest rate on their loan to 0%. The city should now be on track to begin construction in 2021. Mike is also playing an instrumental role in revamping the NPDES Program Writers Matrix, which is our programmatic tool to help promote consistent implementation of regulatory approaches in NPDES permits throughout the region. For these reasons and so much more, we're happy to provide Mike with this well-earned recognition. His efforts are very much appreciated. I know Mike, through his work on these foothill treatment plants, which I know for many of you, we used to see a lot of these matters get petitioned because they're really complex in that they tend to be very small communities of limited financial means, and the waters that they discharge into are so pure and pristine that the limitations by law have to be very, very stringent. Small streams with very sensitive aquatic life and a small community with limited financial means is a really tough picture to solve. Mike has been able to wade through all the issues in the federal regulations to ensure that these permits are both processed in such a way that they're protective of water quality, and I think very importantly, they meet the timeframes to kind of get these things renewed on the applicable schedule. For those of you who aren't as familiar with the federal program, these permits have to be renewed every 5 years. And US EPA, which provides some funding to the NPDES permitting program, is really paying attention, especially so these days, to making sure that a permit backlog doesn't develop. So not only do staff have to work through these permits on regularly difficult technical issues, they also have to make sure that they do it in an applicable time frame set by US EPA. Mike is instrumental in bringing a lot of those permits forward, getting the big settlements, and making sure that water quality is protected by this program. So congratulations, Mike. If you're listening on the YouTube channel, I really appreciate your work. I know the board appreciates you as well. Right. And the final award goes to Carlos Cervantes in the Fresno office. Carlos is an engineering geologist and has worked in the Title 27 unit, which is the landfill unit, for 1.5 years. He began working full-time in about August 2015. He has been working very hard and has been hands-on and eager to learn about all the construction requirements for the Title 27 facilities. He recently reviewed the closure design plans for a landfill. He also finished reviewing the design and geologic reports for a different landfill and discovered a potential release after excessive data review and has reviewed their alternative demonstration report. He assisted with the review of a 2,000-page construction quality assurance report, which includes slope failure at the site from last summer, all while learning the applicable regulations on his job. He has a great attitude, is easy to work with, and is eager to learn and help out on other staff's projects. He has been a great help to the unit when it comes to filling in for staff to conduct site inspections. Carlos has also helped with some of his former positions in industrial stormwater activities until that vacancy can be filled. Carlos is a team player and very worthy of this award. Congratulations, Carlos. I'll add, just from my perspective, and I know I've reported to the board, we've gone through several hiring freezes over the course of this pandemic, and that has meant that there's been some holes that have been tough to fill, particularly in the Fresno office. Sometimes the hiring lags in Fresno mean it's a little bit more energy intensive to bring somebody aboard. And so the vacancies sit for a little while longer. Part of that is because we want to make sure that our position advertisements go out to a diverse pool of candidates and that we have a really robust process for bringing new folks aboard. But Carlos was able to kind of both pitch in for his old position and help out with the stormwater program where there was a vacancy there. And he was also in the Title 27 position, which statewide or region-wide was pretty low on positions. So you had to kind of double down with your work. And in addition, a key manager was also retired during the course of the hiring freeze. So the fact that Carlos was able to accomplish all of this despite those challenges and while doing extra work, I mean, it's truly exceptional. It's emblematic of a lot of the work that our staff do. I really want to extend my congratulations to Carlos for his work in that program area.
And I certainly join you in those congratulations, Patrick, to Carlos and to the rest of the recipients today. It's always inspiring to just learn what the depth and width of the efforts of folks that are working for the regional board. We truly have an exceptional staff that is fulfilling the commitments of this board.
Yes, Dr. Lunkley. I'd just like to comment with, again, with the past year and of the pandemic and all of the changes and the fact that the staff, even before this pandemic, works together as a team and steps up and takes on the added tasks. It's just commendable to the staff, the whole organization, for the work that they do and continue to look at how to make things better. And all the efforts that they put into it is exemplary of those things. So commendable to all of the staff.
I appreciate those kind words, Denise. I know staff do appreciate it when they hear from the board members. It's tough out there.
I'd like to back up for a second here. You mentioned the strategic planning survey that went out.
Yeah.
I just wanted to commend the committee for putting that together. I almost filled it out. I'm glad you noticed that. But it's really comprehensive, and I like the fact that people can add comments on a whole variety of subjects. So it'll probably be a little bit of a challenge to download and interpret all that information, but I'm looking forward to that.
You bet. I think we have close to 500 responses now. So we've been hearing from stakeholders across the spectrum, internal, external. But I'll give you a little bit more of an update. I'll pull the most recent numbers, but absolutely, we're looking forward to hearing from folks.
As Mark stated, that will be a challenge, but it'll be a very interesting one.
Absolutely.
And I know, Carl, you love strategic planning, so you're.
Yes, it just turns me on. I read late into the night to just get through it all. Any further comments by board members?
Dr. Longley, I'd just like to, echo everyone's comments and congratulate all the recipients, and staff does amazing work. Earlier, I didn't get to congratulate Janelle, but, fantastic, superb. We rely on everything she does, so well-deserved. And again, to the staff, we really appreciate you. And it's so difficult not to be there in person to see you all and to communicate with you, but we appreciate all the hard work and effort you're putting in. Congratulations.
Thank you. Any further comments by board members?
Yeah, sure. This is Mr. Yang. I also want to congratulate the recipients of their wonderful award. And I think that their works has helped out the community. And I think that's really important. So I just want to congratulate them for what they did, but really the community benefits from the great work that they did. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, John. You're right. That's what it's all about. Any further comments by board members? Hearing none, then we will.
One more significant item for the EO report, and we're kind of shoehorning it in. It's certainly linked with the matter that we'll be talking about later on this morning. And it has to do with a series of awards, and this is given out on behalf of the board. So Carl, your signature is affixed to this, the board signature is affixed to this. It's a commendation for all the members of the food safety expert panel whose work is concluding here today. For those of you who aren't aware of the panel's work, the people in the audience listening in, this is a group of experts essentially recruited from a variety of different agencies, from the private sector, from universities, to really take a hard look at one of the most controversial practices that this board has encountered in the past decade or so. And that's the use of oil field produced water to irrigate food crops in certain areas of Kern County. I'll turn to Clay to kind of talk about the specifics of this award. But I will say, kind of on a personal note, I remember making many of the phone calls on behalf of the board to talk to these members, to several of these members who are receiving the award here today. And the willingness with which they picked up the phone and said, yes, by all means, I will wade into the midst of this highly controversial topic and offer my professional advice. And in many cases, to kind of suffer the abuse of folks who viewed this matter in a very controversial light on all sides, I think really speaks very highly to this panel, to the individual panel's commitment to water quality, human health, and the environment. And so I really want to put that in there. I being on one end of the call, nervous about making these calls to people saying, hey, we want you to step in to take a hard look at this. No, we're not going to be paying you big bonuses to do this. It's just kind of a side project that we really, really need to understand much, much better than we currently do. And then the willingness of these panel members, some of which I spoke to personally, to say, yes, absolutely, I'm there, is really a testament to the professionalism of everybody on this panel. With that, I'll turn it over to to Clay to get a little bit more into the details. So next up,
before we go there, we can do that during when we move on to that item. Why don't we conclude your report and move on to agenda item 6 at this point?
The awards are given out as part of the EO report.
You're talking about the awards they're getting. I'm sorry.
Awards, yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Longley and Patrick. I'm Clay Rogers. I'm your Assistant Executive Officer in Fresno. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name the members of the panel. The first one, and I'll do it alphabetically. The first one is Dr. Stephen Beam, who's the Chief of the Milk and Dairy Food Safety Branch at the California Department of Food and Agriculture. The second one is Dr. Andrew Gordis, who's a toxicologist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Andy just retired the end of December, but graciously has agreed to stay on till the end. The next one is Mark Jones, who's a toxicologist for the Army Corps of Engineers. And when he started this, he took a job with the Army Corps of Engineers while this project was underway. He was a consulting toxicologist who had done work on food safety and the issues, looked at some of the fruits that are grown with produced water. And fortunately, the Army Corps of Engineers was gracious enough to allow him some time to continue in this effort. We appreciate that very much. The next one is Patrick Kennelly, who represented the California Department of Food and Health prior to his retirement a couple of years ago. But we still want to represent Pat. He had important aspects to present and information to provide and consider during his time on the panel. The next one is Dr. Kenneth Klock, who is a toxicologist with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard and Assessment. And Ken's been very instrumental in his knowledge of toxicology, knowledge of how individual chemicals are treated, because as we'll talk about during the item, there are a lot of chemicals in oil field, potentially in oil field waters. And so his contribution was great to have. The next is Dr. Gabrielle Ludwig, who is the Director of Sustainability and Environmental Affairs for the Almond Board. And Gabrielle brought very important aspects of, the industry. She's also extremely well educated, very informed on toxicological issues, as food safety is a major issue for the agriculture industry, and very much appreciate her input. The next is Dr. Bruce Mackler, who is, I should say he was prior to the end of last July, regional toxicologist with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Again, after Bruce retired, he graciously agreed to continue to be a liaison with US EPA and continue on in his services. He was instrumental in kind of being a mediator at times between some of the panel members, brought a lot of expertise in this area, and greatly, Dr. Mackler, I appreciate very much. I should also say, interestingly enough, when we recruited Dr. Mackler to be a member, Dr. Longley and I were at a meeting at UC Davis, where Bruce was a part of it and made a presentation. And I remember catching Dr. Longley outside and saying, Dr. Longley, we have to recruit this person for the panel. And then approaching Bruce out in the yards and asking him and telling him about what we were trying to do. And he graciously was on board from the very beginning, excited to be a part of it. Can't thank him enough. The next is Dr. Dave Mazzara, who's the chief of the Food and Drug and Cannabis Safety branch at the California Department of Food and Health. Dr. Mazzara took over from Pat Kennelly after Pat retired a few years ago. I must say, I was excited when Dave became a part of this because I had the pleasure of working with Dave on a prior food safety issue having to deal with dairy manure and application on crops. And Dave was an instrumental part of that panel, and certainly has been an instrumental part of this panel, and want to thank Dave. The next is Dr. Barbara Peterson, who's a principal scientist with a company called Exponent Inc., where she oversees food safety issues. Including in the past, she's been involved with the World Health Organization in food safety issues, came highly recommended to us, and was a critical part of this program. The next is Dr. Seth Shonkoff, who is the executive director of PSE Healthy Energy in Berkeley. He's also an adjunct professor at UC Berkeley. Seth was an excellent addition to the board. We tried very hard to assemble a board that were not all like thinkers. We wanted a group of different backgrounds, different opinions, and Seth brought that to us. With that, I just want to say a few overall words about the panel and what an honor it has been for me to work with this group of the consummate professionals that they treated everybody with respect. They listened to everybody, even if they had opposing opinions and thoughts about the subject. They worked together through a very complex issue. They donated vast amounts of their time. We had 14 public meetings where they interacted with the public. They interacted with our staff. They had to deal with a geologist like myself, as kind of the primary representative for the board. And I can't thank them enough for all of their time and effort and hard work through this entire thing. It lasted longer than we anticipated. They stuck it out. And today isn't quite the very end of it, because as we'll find out later today, what we're discussing is a draft report. We will be addressing comments that come in during the board meeting and come in writing after the board meeting. And we are going to ask the panel for one last effort to help us consider those comments and whether additional improvements can and should be made to the white paper beyond the draft that will be presented a little bit later. Last but not least, I have one resolution left. It's for a former panel member who became our scientific advisor, and that's Dr. William Stringfellow, who's with Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. He's professor emeritus from Oh,
University Pacific.
yes, thank you. I was going to go that university in Stockton. Thanks, Carl. I had a little brain freeze at the University of Pacific. And let me say that it's been one of the honors of my life to work with Dr. Stringfellow. He is the consummate professional beyond what I even knew. He came highly recommended to us. I knew of his resume. I knew of his abilities, but he has helped my staff and myself through this issue, has made incredible additions to work through this issue. And I can't thank Will enough for all the effort that he has put in. It's true that he got paid for a fair amount of the time that he worked with us, but I have to commend Will because the contract ran out, and through issues at state, it could not be extended. And Will has graciously donated his time, his energy to get this over the finish line. And without his input, it would have been a much more difficult task, and perhaps a task that we might not have even been able to make it over the hurdle. And much of the success of this panel, the success of regional board staff is due to the inputs of Dr. Stringfellow. And I just, with all my heart, I want to thank him very much for all of his hard work and effort, and all of the panel members in this. Thank you.
I would like to say that the comments that we just heard made by Clay are so very well deserved by all the panel members and by Dr. Stringfellow. I've attended the meetings, and I have to attest the amount of work that's been put in on this by all the folks that have just been mentioned is tremendous. We were so fortunate to have such a highly qualified scientific panel to address this very important issue. And I also want to thank Clay for his leadership through this long journey that we've been on.
And I guess I could say it later, but since we're doing an award, I know what it's like to dedicate your time when you have a full-time job and you're dedicating time to something that's important, even if it's not necessarily paid. So just, for the good of the state. So I appreciate the time that you've given. I appreciate the work that's gone into figuring out tough issues. And I know that we're going to hear about the results of your work later, but I think the varied strengths and points of view that came into it add the kind of credibility to this panel and to the report that just gives us confidence. So thank you for working together on hard issues, on emerging issues. I'm glad that you were selected as a superior accomplishment and for the recognition today. So thank you.
And I think for this one, we will be asking for a commendation by the board. So we will be asking for a vote on these awards.
So for what I'll be asking for then, Patrick, is that there be a motion commending the individuals that have been so named for their outstanding work on the issue of the use of produced water for growing agricultural crops.
That's perfect.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion, Dr. Longley.
Thank you, Denise. Do I have a second?
This is Carmen. I'll second.
Denise made the motion. Carmen seconded. Call the roll, please.
Dr. Longley, before we call the roll, can I make a brief comment?
Certainly. Go ahead.
Yeah. I am very proud of what the Food Safety Committee has done in this report. I started out being on that panel early on. I remember the controversy, and gosh, it was back in 2014, 2015, but to get to this point is really commendable. The money that was spent to hear and address the concerns of the residents and people that really voiced concerns about it has been a tremendous, made a tremendous difference. And to get to the conclusion of where we are today, it shows a lot of the board's determination to address the concerns of the communities and to bring forth the type of intellectual support to address the concerns, and then the work that the staff did, the tremendous work that the Fresno office staff did. We're very proud of the work that was done, the panel, and the outcome of the safety panel's report. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Denise. Any further comments by board members? Hearing none, call the
Yes,
roll,
Dr.
please. Yes, go ahead, Raji.
I just wanted to say that this food safety panel, everyone that was on it, thank you so much for your help on this. It was definitely a controversial subject. And I know Patrick had mentioned many times, folks don't step into these waters because why should they? They're busy doing their own work. But I think it takes a lot of courage to face these tough issues and tackle them. And it's important for all of us to handle and address these tough issues. And I commend everyone for all their work. It was definitely a very interesting process. And everyone on that food safety panel, you all are so wonderful and gracious for the work you have done. And it's been such an experience to learn from you all.
Thank you very much, Raji. And as the new board members will learn, we do have committees. Those committees can't be more than 2 individuals. And for reasons that Patrick can explain to you later. But Raji was one of the board members who was on the committee that was attending the meetings that were held for this particular issue by the expert panel. Any further comments by board members?
I just add one thing. Thank you for that download, Clay. That was an impressive blue panel committee. The credentials were very impressive. And I just wanted to mention, I actually had the pleasure of working with Mark Jones at the consultant that he worked at before the Corps. And I tried very hard to convince him not to leave unsuccessfully, but he was already involved in the panel then. And as you mentioned, he stuck with it on the job when he moved to the Corps. And I appreciate his efforts and everybody's efforts to get us to this point. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any further comments by board members? I realize it takes a moment for you to unmute. Hearing none, then call the roll, please.
Board Member Bradford,
Yes.
Board Member Brar,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Yang,
Aye.
Board Member Advis,
Aye.
Vice Chair Ramirez,
Yes.
Chair Longley.
Yes. The motion passes unanimously. Any further comment by board members? Hearing none, then we'll move on to agenda item 6. Approval of the minutes from prior board meetings. And as is the, Patrick, could you explain if individuals don't attend all or part of a particular meeting, they typically announce that they're abstaining. Could you explain that in a little more detail, please?
I think you got the meat of it. You can just abstain from the vote. You're counted for the purposes of a quorum, which we shouldn't have any problem with. But if you didn't make the board meeting, just announce it and then announce your abstention. And then we should be fine to vote to ratify the minutes from the prior board meetings.
And so we'll begin with the board meeting for the 15th, 16th of October, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve those meeting minutes.
Mark's made the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second Dr. Longley.
Denise is seconded. Call the roll, please.
Board Member Bradford,
Yes.
Board Member Brar,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Yang,
Aye.
Board Member Advis,
I will abstain.
Vice Chair Ramirez,
Yes.
Chair Longley.
Yes. Board Member Yang, you were not at that board meeting. Do you wish to reconsider your vote?
Abstain.
Thank you. Okay. Motion passes. We'll move on to the 10 December 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Yes, Dr. Longley, I'll make the motion to approve.
And I'll
Denise-
second.
Denise has moved the motion. Carmen has seconded. Call the roll, please.
Board Member Bradford,
Yes.
Board Member Brar,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Yang,
Should I abstain again? Okay, abstain.
Normal thing would be to abstain since
All
we're
right.
at the meeting.
Okay, abstain.
Board Member Advis,
I will abstain.
Vice Chair Ramirez,
Yes.
Chair Longley.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 8. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's Mule Creek State Prison Facility, Amador County. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider a settlement agreement and stipulation for entry of an administrative civil liability order for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation Mule Creek State Prison Facility in Amador County.
Carl,
Yes,
if I could, we can work through the uncontested calendar prior to that one. I know there's a number of folks who are here looking for the board to
okay,
approve
I'll
that.
go back to that. Flip 2 pages, sorry. We'll go to agenda item 7. Thank you, Patrick. The uncontested calendar. This is a time and place for a public hearing to consider uncontested items 10 through 13. Janelle, has anyone submitted an email requesting to comment on any of the uncontested items?
No, Dr. Longley, there's some individuals that are present in case needed, but no.
Very good. Are there any late revisions?
There are some late revisions, Dr. Longley. We have late revisions for agenda item 10B, City of Manteca. This is an NPDES permit renewal for the wastewater treatment plant. The late revisions are typographical errors and clarifications. We also have late revisions for item 10D. And that item is an NPDES permit renewal for the city of Turlock. These are also clarifications and typographical errors. We have spoken with both of the representatives for these facilities, discharger representatives for these facilities, and they are okay with these late revisions.
Thank you very much. Any questions by board members? Hearing none, I'll close the hearing. And I'll ask for a motion and a second.
Dr. Longley, this is Carmen. I would move the consent agenda as presented with the late revisions.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Carmen's moved, Mark has seconded. The late revisions with the changes. Call the roll, please.
Board Member Bradford,
Yes.
Board Member Brar,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Yang,
Yes.
Board Member Advis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ramirez,
Yes.
Chair Longley.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair
Now-
Longley.
Now we'll move on to agenda item 8. Wanted to get to that one. This is the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, Mule Creek State Prison Facility, Amador County. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider a settlement agreement and stipulation for entry of an administrative civil liability order for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, Mule Creek State Prison Facility in Amador County. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, testimony should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Okay, we'll move on. After the staff presentation, there will be a presentation by the Southern California Coastal Research Project, which conducted a microbial source study of E. coli detections in the watershed. Interested persons will then be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. Please state your name, address, and affiliation before speaking. Please indicate whether or not you've taken the oath also. We'll now turn to the executive officer who will give some background on this case. And then we will hear the staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Longley. I think for many of you who have been on the board for a while, you know that the Mule Creek State Prison has been one of the focuses of the board's enforcement program for some time, ever since fairly significant releases were discovered from the facility in January of 2018. Following that, those releases, we've had our staff diligently take a look at Mule Creek State Prison. We've engaged in fairly extensive settlement negotiations with California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation over what the path forward would be at Mule Creek. And we also jointly worked out an agreement whereby some of the preeminent scientists in the realm of microbial source studies were employed to take a look at where the E. coli sources were at Mule Creek State Prison and to figure out whether they were from birds, whether they were from humans, or whether they were from other sources within the watershed. I think this settlement here represents a significant step forward with respect to bringing this facility into compliance. It is a $2.5 million penalty. Some of those funds are directed at compliance actions undertaken at the prison itself. Other funds will be paid directly to the cleanup and abatement account to be used by the state board to address water quality problems more generally. So this is a very significant penalty. I think you'll hear from members of the public who are concerned that the Waterboards enforcement action was not sufficiently diligent in prosecuting these violations. And I think the survey that has been done by CDCR at the board's direction, the surveys of the stormwater system and of the sewer system, the assessment of their facility, the cleanup actions that they've undertaken, along with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project's work for microbial source detection at the facility, shows that I think the $2.5 million penalty is absolutely justified. And this is key for the violations that occurred within the time frame that is covered by the settlement. Now, the settlement itself is bookended. It's bookended by the January violation date up to April of 2019. Subsequent violations did occur at the facility or are alleged to have occurred at the facility. The board may be entertaining some prosecutorial actions pertaining to later violations, but this settlement is only for those violations that occurred when the facility did not have adequate permitting, essentially enrolled under the wrong permit, wasn't doing robust enough monitoring, and really wasn't working hard to get to the bottom of what the water quality violations were at Mule Creek. That situation has changed significantly since then. I'm not saying again that there were no violations subsequent to April of 2019, but the violations were very different in character than the violations that occurred between January of 2018 and April of 2019. And that's really what this settlement is here before you to resolve. So without further kind of ado, I will introduce JJ Baum, who is the Assistant Executive Officer in charge of the Compliance and Enforcement Unit and other units. He's the executive sponsor for the Compliance and Enforcement Program. And Carrie Holmes, who is the Program Manager for the Compliance and Enforcement Unit at the Central Valley Water Board, which means she helps coordinate enforcement actions across the region's 3 offices. With her are a couple of her staff, Howard Hold, Kenny Croyle, will be delivering additional kind of support or parts of the presentation justifying the $2.5 million assessment that the board is asked to approve here today. In addition, we have a couple of representatives from the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project who will be giving a presentation about their microbial source work that they did at Mule Creek State Prison. I'll also add that the board has vested myself with a lot of authority to sign off on most settlements, and most settlements do not reach the board's public hearing. I have elected to, in consultation with the board's chair, to bring this settlement before the entire board and not to use delegated authority to sign off on the settlement, because I believe that sufficient controversy exists at this facility to allow the public there to vet their concerns in front of the full board. Lastly, CDCR is not here today to talk about the violations or the settlement, and they are doing that under advice from their own legal counsel. They are also being sued by a number of organizations in Amador County for subsequent violations or violations that occurred subsequent to the scope of this settlement. And on advice of counsel, they are not appearing. However, they have submitted a letter into the record supportive of this settlement. I know, I can speak personally, that this settlement is significant to them. It has raised, it's $2.5 million, regardless of the size of the organization, is a significant penalty, and something that, I think will work to correct the behaviors at Mule Creek and will work to create a sufficient deterrent for similar actions by similarly situated dischargers, including other prisons throughout the region, throughout the state. So with that, I will hand it to JJ and Carrie to deliver the presentation describing in more detail the actions that occurred at Mule Creek State Prison and the scope of the settlement that's before the board today.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Chair Longley and members of the board. We have a presentation coming forward with giving you the history of the site and then also the background of this specific order, and then followed by the E. coli study given by Dr. A.B. Zimmerfaust. So, Carrie, are you there?
Oh, now I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
We hear you.
All right. Let's see. All
I'll
right,
control
thank
this
you.
for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Jean. Okay, so good morning, Dr. Longley and members of the board. I wanted to extend my congratulations first and welcome the new board members. Look forward to working with you. My name is Carrie Holmes, and I am the program manager of the Compliance and Enforcement section for Region 5 and supervising engineer working out of the Rancho Cordova office, and I have taken the oath. I have over 15 years of experience with the Water Board, and I am a licensed professional engineer. We're here today to ask that you adopt a proposed settlement agreement and stipulations for entry of an administrative civil liability order for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's Mule Creek State Prison for violations of the Clean Water Act at the prison facility. I'd like to advise the board that Central Valley Water Board staff developed this presentation without the participation of CDCR because they are constrained by ongoing litigation. The statements in this presentation are those of board staff and present our view of the site and the settlement. I'm going to hand the first portion of the presentation over to the Compliance and Enforcement Case Manager for this site, Kenny Croyle, to discuss the background and history of compliance. Then I will return to discuss the details of the proposed order and make a recommendation to the board. Kenny.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Kenny Croyle, and I am a staff engineer in the Compliance and Enforcement section in the Rancho Cordova office. I have taken the oath. I'm here today to provide you with some background for the facility and summarize my inspection observations and the enforcement actions that led to the stipulated agreement that you will be considering today. Mule Creek State Prison is located approximately 1 mile west of the city of Ione, California, and approximately 10 miles west of the city of Jackson. The prison opened in 1987, and since that time has been under the jurisdiction and control of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or CDCR.
Pardon me, Kenny. Pardon me. Jean, can you flip to the next slide? Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead, Kenny. Sorry about that.
Through 2015, the prison consisted of facilities A, B, C, and their accompanying yards. These facilities are identified hereafter as the Old Prison Facility, labeled on the left side of the map in yellow. The Old Prison Facility contains housing for approximately 2,500 inmates. In 2016, the prison was expanded with the construction of the Mule Creek Infill Complex, or MCIC, which added housing for approximately 1,600 more inmates. The MCIC is located in the upper right portion of the map. While it contributes to the wastewater flows at the facility, the issues surrounding the stormwater system that we will be discussing today are focused solely on the Old Prison Facility. As you can see, Mule Creek runs through the center of the site, indicated by the blue line. The wastewater treatment plant is located just above the Old Prison Facility, and the land application areas, labeled LAAs, are located along Mule Creek. The effluent storage reservoirs are shown at both the top and lower right of the map. Next slide, please. Mule Creek is a tributary to Dry Creek and then to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. The Regional Board's Basin Plan establishes the beneficial uses for the waters of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, which are applicable to Mule Creek. Mule Creek is also a water of the U.S. Next slide, please. As some CDCR staff have told me, the prison is much like a small self-contained city. There are a broad range of activities and operations which necessitate several regulatory measures to adequately monitor the facility's discharges. The individual waste discharge requirements specify that the requirements and monitoring related to the treatment and disposal of domestic and industrial wastewater. This covers the on-site treatment plant, effluent storage reservoir, land application areas, and the export of effluent off-site to the City of Ione's nearby treatment facility. The WDRs were last updated in 2015. The facility's sanitary sewer system is covered under the Sanitary Sewer General Order, which requires inspection, maintenance, and repairs of that system. The facility submitted an NOI under this order in 2006 as part of a previous enforcement action for spills to Mule Creek. The facility was designated as a small MS4 system in April of 2020 as part of the Regional Board's efforts to better regulate the stormwater discharges from the facility. Prior to that, CDCR had no stormwater permits, nor any permit allowing discharge to surface water. Regional Board staff issued a 13383 order in December of 2020 to add monitoring requirements to that permit. CDCR also filed a No Exposure Certification, or NEC, for the Industrial Stormwater General Order. They indicate that all industrial operations occur entirely indoors and do not impact stormwater, and therefore the requirements of the Industrial Stormwater General Order are not applicable to their facility. Board staff has recently performed an inspection to evaluate this and will make a determination soon. Next slide. This map shows the underground sanitary sewer and stormwater collection systems within the old prison, excluding small diameter pipes. The green lines are for the sanitary sewer system, while the red lines indicate the stormwater system. Note that both systems are gravity systems within the prison perimeter and were installed within the same trench in many cases. We will first be discussing the sanitary sewer system. Both industrial and domestic waste flows are combined in the system to the southern end of the prison near the labeled parking lot. The sewage is then pumped to the on-site wastewater treatment plant in the upper right side of the map. Next slide, please. The on-site wastewater treatment plant is designed to treat only domestic wastewater and has a capacity of 0.74 million gallons a day. The treatment plant produces secondary disinfected effluent, which is stored in the on-site reservoir to either be disposed of in the on-site spray fields or exported to the City of Ione's treatment plant for further treatment and disposal. Next slide, please. Currently, the facility houses approximately 4,000 inmates and employs 1,250 CDCR staff full-time. In addition, the facility receives an unknown amount of domestic wastewater flows from the CAL FIRE Training Academy located on the other side of Mule Creek. The old prison facility also generates an unknown volume of industrial wastewater from the several industrial operations. These operations include a coffee roaster, a meat processor and smokehouse, textile manufacturing operation, and a large-scale laundry operation that serves several other prisons across the state. While the volume of industrial wastewater is unknown and not measured, we can qualitatively estimate it based on the flows at similar-sized facilities. For comparison, the nearby city of Jackson serves a population of approximately 4,600 people and has a max dry weather flow of 0.43 million gallons a day. Mule Creek State Prison has a similar-sized population with a max dry weather flow of 0.76 million gallons a day, nearly twice that of Jackson. Therefore, we can assume the industrial wastewater flows make up a significant portion of the wastewater stream entering the site treatment plant. Next slide, please. Now we will discuss the stormwater system, which again is indicated by the red lines. This is a gravity system that collects all stormwater within the prison perimeter, as well as the loading docks, and conveys it to the perimeter system that encircles the prison. We will take a closer look at the perimeter system in a minute. From the perimeter system, stormwater collects in 2 basins and then is discharged to Mule Creek via earthen dishes. The discharge points are indicated by the red circles. For reference, the squirp sample points are indicated by the white circles. Next slide, please. Other activities of interest related to stormwater include vocational welding shops, machine shops, carpentry shops, loading docks and warehouses associated with the industrial operations mentioned, vehicle maintenance garages, and hazardous material storage, including cleansers, solvents, and fuels. CDCR has reported poor housekeeping and washdown practices can occur. Board staff spoke with workers at the industrial operations who described rinsing of dumpsters, drums, and totes out into storm drains. CDCR has issued several notices to their staff and the prisoners who work the industrial operations to address this, but it is unclear how effective this has been. Next slide, please. The old prison facility has a system of drains and underground pipes within the fence perimeter to collect stormwater. The volume of runoff from this area is relatively high due to the large percentage of hard surfaces and roofs within the facility. Collected stormwater discharges from underground laterals to the perimeter stormwater system composed of earthen ditches and underground culverts. The perimeter system is highlighted in yellow on the map, and a typical section is shown in the top left picture. This perimeter system completely surrounds the facility just outside the lethal electric fence. The perimeter system drains into 2 collection basins, the larger of which is shown in the center picture. Discharge from these basins is controlled by manual slide gates. The basins each discharge to earthen ditches that lead to Mule Creek at 2 discharge points indicated on the map. The bottom left picture shows the earthen ditches just downstream of the main basin. Next slide, please. On 28 December 2017, board staff received a complaint via phone call regarding the alleged ongoing discharge of water from an unknown source directly into the perimeter stormwater system and subsequently into Mule Creek. The complainant was a third-party construction contractor who was completing a project to upgrade the perimeter stormwater ditch to an underground culvert and vault system. The complainant observed discharges of varied flow and quality occurring consistently since they began work in August 2017. It is unknown how long these discharges were occurring prior to this complaint. The complainant provided the regional board with photos and videos of the discharge spanning several months. The photo here was included in these documents. The discharge varied between clear and jet black, sometimes with solid, and sometimes steaming hot. The discharges occurred during both wet and dry season, regardless of recent precipitation or irrigation. Based on the complaint and supporting documents, board staff believe the source to be non-stormwater. Next slide, please. In response to the complaint, compliance and enforcement staff from the WDRs and stormwater units inspected Mule Creek State Prison on 4 January 2018. During the inspection, board staff observed discharges to the perimeter system similar to what was described in the complaint despite no recent rain. The discharges were entering the perimeter system and eventually discharging to Mule Creek. To understand the threat of this discharge, board staff collected 2 samples from the stormwater system. Samples were analyzed for typical wastewater and stormwater constituents. Next slide, please. The laboratory results from the stormwater samples were received on 18 January 2018. The results indicated that the discharge exhibited the characteristics of wastewater and exceeded several applicable regulatory limits. Notably, total coliforms, fecal coliforms, and E. coli were at levels too high to quantitate with using typical dilution schedule. These samples were unable to be reran at a higher dilution rate due to the short hold time for coliform analysis. Next slide, please. After reviewing these results, board staff conferred with the assistant executive officer and determined that they indicated a threat to water quality and more information was needed to better understand the apparent illegal discharge. CDCR was instructed to cease the discharge via email. CDCR responded stating they would cease the discharge and reroute contaminated stormwater through the perimeter system to the sewer cleanouts that lead to the on-site domestic wastewater treatment plant. Next slide, please. On 14 February 2018, the Assistant Executive Officer issued a Water Code 13267 order to CDCR. The goal of this order was to reiterate the need to cease the discharge of contaminated stormwater to Mule Creek, outline the steps that are needed to immediately prevent further impacts, and fully investigate and address the source of the waste constituents. To that end, the order required the following items with detailed individual requirements: the submittal of weekly status reports, including sample results, discharge volumes, rainfall, and the status updates for the wastewater treatment plant and investigation and repair efforts. This requirement is ongoing. An interim disposal plan was required to ensure the contaminated flows of the stormwater system are contained, properly treated, and disposed of. A monitoring plan was required to characterize the discharge with regular sampling. A domestic well sampling plan is required to assess potential impacts to nearby private domestic wells. The stormwater system investigation work plan is required to fully investigate the stormwater collection system and determine the source of the waste constituents detected in the stormwater. The stormwater system investigation findings report is required to present the findings and conclusions of the investigative efforts completed under the work plan. And the final disposal plan was required to incorporate the conclusions and findings of the report, gathered data from the monitoring efforts and issues, and how the issues determine how the issues causing the contaminated discharge will be permanently addressed. Next slide, please. Approximately 600 individual water samples have been collected from the stormwater system since January 2018 as part of the monitoring plan required by the 13267 order. It should be noted that for some of the constituents, the maximum concentrations noted here are significantly higher than the next highest concentration reported. However, based on the high variability of the data and the transient nature of surface water and potential waste sources, i.e. washdown buckets, dumping of mops, etc., board staff believe many of these maximum concentrations to be accurate and not errors. In fact, the large variability of the data suggests that true maximum concentrations could be significantly higher. Variations in dilution caused by rainfall is also a big factor. While the high variability in concentrations and wide range of contaminants makes it difficult to identify exact sources of the waste, the number of detections over the water quality objective illustrates the discharge poses a threat to surface water and groundwater quality. Next slide, please. Although fecal coliforms can come from many sources other than human waste, it is important to note that the Basin Plan water quality objective of 200 mpn per 100 milliliters for fecal coliforms in surface water does not specify that the limit is restricted to human sources. Fecal coliforms, regardless of source, are subject to the water quality objective. Nearly 95% of the almost 600 samples collected from the stormwater system are higher than this objective. Additionally, the majority of the samples were analyzed using a typical dilution factor and proved to be too low to adequately quantify the coliforms. Regardless of whether these detections were caused by human waste or not, they indicate a threat to water quality and must be addressed. Next slide, please. The prison had ceased all discharges to the creek beginning on January 19, 2018. Because of the order to cease the discharge was issued in the middle of the wet season, and because of the gap in time between the issuance of the 13267 order and the submittal date for the interim disposal plan, board staff performed several inspections to determine if the facility was adequately prepared for the forecasted rain events and how the interim measures performed during the wet weather. These inspections took place on 22 February, 6 March, 12 March, and 13 March of 2018. Additional follow-up inspections occurred on 23 April, 16 June, and 5 October of 2018. Next slide, please. Pictured is the interim disposal measures as of 22 February. The main collection basin is shown here. The slide gates in the foreground of the stormwater collection basin have been closed, preventing discharge to Mule Creek. CDCR staff has installed float pumps to pump out the stormwater to nearby sewer laterals. 2-inch PVC was used to pipe the water to a nearby 4-inch sewer cleanout. Board staff was concerned that this plan, as implemented, could easily be overwhelmed in rain events, as the catchment area for the two basins was well over 70 acres and composed of nearly all hardscape. Based on board staff's experience with past enforcement actions, this unengineered temporary system was woefully undersized. Board staff expressed these concerns during the inspection, stating that the current strategy may not work during significant storm events. Board staff suggested doing some runoff calculations and acquiring larger trailer-mounted pumps and some on-site storage in the form of Baker tanks to prepare for the rain. Board staff is also concerned that a large amount of dilute stormwater being directed to the wastewater treatment plant may cause adverse effects for the biological processes. Next slide, please. On 6 March 2018, board staff again inspected the interim disposal measures. There had been no significant changes made. The picture here is of the secondary collection basin, which has a similar float pump and PVC piping. Board staff again expressed concerns during the inspection that the current strategy may not work during significant storm events. The area was forecasted to receive rain over the next 10 days. Next slide, please. On 12 March 2018, board staff again inspected the interim disposal measures. Significant rain was forecast the next few days. 2 trailer-mounted pumps, a 3-inch and a 4-inch, were parked at the perimeter road next to the collection pump. Both pumps had flexible lines to pump the water from the collection sump to 2 long hoses running to nearby sanitary sewer manholes. The picture here is of the main collection basin and shows the pipes and hoses for the interim measure. Board staff once again expressed concern during the inspection that the current strategy may not work during significant storm events. Next slide, please. Board staff again inspected the interim disposal measures the next day on 13 March 2018 to evaluate how the system performed during wet weather. Less than an inch of rain had fallen overnight. The picture here is of the same main collection basin pictured in the previous slide from the previous day. The 2 trailer-mounted pumps were working, but the flooding was still occurring. The water in the wastewater treatment plant was highly turbid, and it was unclear how well it was operating at that time. Board staff once again expressed concern during the inspection that the current strategy may not be sufficient, and the area is forecasted to receive significant rain in the next 24 hours. Next slide, please. Significant rainfall on 13 March and 14 March caused heavy flooding in the prison's stormwater system. The perimeter system was completely overwhelmed and contaminated stormwater overtopped the perimeter road. The uncontrolled discharge flowed down the surrounding slopes, off property, and into drainages along Highway 104, as well as into Mule Creek. CDCR's chief plant operator reported that the wastewater treatment plant had been washed out by all the dilute flows and had been directed to the stormwater system. There was no indication that the plant was effectively treating wastewater at that time. Next slide, please. These photos were provided by Mule Creek staff and show some of the ponded contaminated stormwater off property on adjacent fields. Next slide, please. The interim disposal plan was submitted the following day on March 15th, 2018. It stated that CDCR planned to contain all water within the stormwater system and convey it to the on-site wastewater treatment plant. This is essentially what CDCR had attempted up until this point, formalized in a plan. However, the plan indicated that by doing this, there was a high risk of plant upset during large storm events that could essentially halt treatment at the wastewater treatment plant for weeks. This had already occurred during the previous rain event. Therefore, board staff rejected the plan, reiterated the requirements of the 13267 order, and stated that the interim disposal plan must be submitted as soon as possible. CDCR submitted a revised interim disposal plan on 24 May 2018. The revised plan indicated that for forecasted rain events of more than 1/10 of an inch in 1 hour or 3/10 of an inch in 24 hours, CDCR would discharge the contaminated stormwater to Mule Creek to avoid flooding of the prison, as they did not have sufficient storage capacity on site. These measurements describe a relatively small rain event. Board staff indicated that they could not approve this plan or any plan that describes discharge in violation of the Clean Water Act, the Water Code, or the waste discharge requirements. However, CDCR implemented the plan anyway. Next slide, please. After the uncontrolled releases from CDCR's unapproved implementation of their revised interim disposal plan, they upgraded their temporary disposal system by adding additional trailer-mounted pumps and 10 Baker tanks, approximately 200,000 gallons of total capacity. If they deemed a storm event to meet their criteria, they would close the slide gates and pump the contaminated storm water to the Baker tanks, which they would then slowly bleed back into the sanitary sewer system to avoid plant upset. Next slide, please. On 5 October 2018, board staff conducted an inspection to assess the wet weather preparedness of the interim stormwater disposal system for the coming wet season. Sometime between a 13 June inspection and a 5 October inspection, CDCR had removed all on-site water storage tanks. The trailer-mounted pumps remained in place, and large diameter hard pipe was installed between the pumps and sanitary sewer manholes. Board staff once again expressed concern during this inspection that the current strategy had failed before during significant rain events. However, CDCR staff indicated that they intended to continue to discharge to Mule Creek during large storm events as described in the revised interim disposal plan that was not approved. Board staff once again indicated that such a discharge would be a violation. Next slide, please. To date, CDCR has not submitted an acceptable interim disposal plan as required by the 14 February 2018 13267 order. However, they continue to discharge to Mule Creek under the criteria they described in the rejected revised interim disposal plan. CDCR has also changed their practices of containing dry weather flows to Mule Creek sometimes during 2019. Dry weather flows have been consistently reported by CDCR since the weekly monitoring began under the 13267 order. CDCR claims that these dry weather flows composed of irrigation runoff and air conditioner condensate and therefore are allowed under the MS4 permit. However, analytical data of the discharge still shows consistent presence of waste constituents above basin plan limits. At this time, CDCR allows the stormwater system to discharge to Mule Creek at all times unless rain is forecasted, but at less than 1 inch in 1 hour and 3 inches in, or excuse me, less than 1/10 of an inch in 1 hour and 3/10 of an inch over a 24-hour period. This encompasses a very small portion of rain events. Monitoring is still ongoing under the MS4 permit and the additional 13383 order. This completes my portion of the presentation. I will hand it over to Carrie Holmes to talk about the stipulated agreement.
Thank you, Kenny. Can I have the next slide, please? I know that was a lot of information, so quick break here. I'm going to get into the proposed settlement for the specific unpermitted discharges to Mule Creek that Patrick mentioned. Outside of the proposed settlement that's being presented for your approval today, there are still many ongoing issues with the site. CDCR's investigative efforts have identified infrastructure deficiencies in the stormwater and sanitary sewer systems that may be sources of domestic and industrial waste commingling with stormwater. Compliance and enforcement staff are continuing to address these issues as well as other water quality concerns at the prisons. I will discuss ongoing compliance efforts towards the end of the presentation, which are not being addressed by the proposed settlement before you today. Next slide. I'm going to begin with discussing the alleged violations of the proposed settlement agreement. Following the failure to contain and treat commingled flows identified after the complaint was received by regional board staff, CDCR began using the practices described in the revised interim disposal plan Kenny previously discussed, despite board staff repeatedly communicating that it would be a violation of the Clean Water Act. This practice led to continued unpermitted discharges of commingled flows directly to Mule Creek. Although the discharges appeared to be of extremely poor water quality, potentially pointing to raw sewage and industrial discharges, after the investigations conducted by board staff and CDCR, it was determined that the quality of water was not as poor as originally thought and consists of mainly stormwater. However, continued water quality characterization efforts continue to ensure the discharges are adequately protective of the environment. These unpermitted discharges continued until April 10, 2019, when the facility was permitted under the small MS4 permit. After multiple discussions between CDCR and regional board executives, it was ultimately determined and agreed upon that the appropriate permitting mechanism would be MS4 coverage. For the regional board to designate a small MS4 discharge, the designation must be based on the potential to discharge urban runoff that causes or contributes to exceedance of water quality standards, including impairment of designated uses and other water quality impacts, including habitat and biological impacts. In February 2019, after public review and comment, the regional board approved the designation of Mule Creek State Prison as a regulated small MS4 under the general permit. In April 2019, the state board executive director amended the small MS4 general permit to designate Mule Creek State Prison as a non-traditional small MS4 and required CDCR to submit a notice of intent and appropriate fee within 6 months of the effective date of the designation. CDCR continues to discharge commingled flows both during dry and wet weather under the MS4 permit. Until the stormwater discharges to the creek are adequately characterized, CDCR is reporting these discharges to the Office of Emergency Services. Therefore, the proposed settlement assesses unpermitted discharges between January 2018, when illegal discharges were discovered after the complaint, and April 2019, when MS4 enrollment occurred. Next slide. CDCR collected numerous samples for the stormwater collection system during this period as required by the 13267 order to characterize the stormwater. That data was used to determine specific details of the settlement. The Central Valley Water Board and the discharger stipulated to the number of days and volumes of discharge for the purpose of resolving the administrative civil liability action. Based on the discharges that occurred from 2018 through April 2019, CDCR and board staff stipulated to a total of 19 spills occurring over 79 days, with spills ranging in duration from 1 to 12 days. Although board staff continued to assert that the entire volume of the discharge during this period could be a basis for an administrative liability, the discharger asserted the alleged non-stormwater portion of the discharges are the only basis for liability. The legal and factual dispute was not resolved. However, for purposes of settlement, the stipulated volumes and days of discharge were used to estimate an appropriate administrative civil liability. Therefore, approximately 1.1 million gallons were used in the penalty calculations of the proposed order. Next slide, please. The Waterboards 2017 enforcement policy was used to calculate a proposed penalty amount. To calculate the initial liability based on gallons discharged, the California Water Code states the civil liability amount is to be based on the number of gallons discharged but not cleaned up over 1,000 gallons. The first 1,000 gallons discharged are subtracted from the total gallons discharged. Additionally, the enforcement policy factors are used as multipliers. These factors include the degree of toxicity of the discharge, actual or potential for harm to beneficial uses, and the susceptibility to cleanup or abatement. After the factors are applied, the per gallon assessment calculated using the Water Code's statutory maximum penalty of $10 per gallon is approximately $1.7 million. Next slide. When there is a discharge violation, the Water Code also includes an initial liability amount on a per day basis using the same factors and multipliers that were used in the per gallon analysis. Recall the spill event took place over 79 days, and using the Water Code's maximum civil liability of $10,000 per day, then applying the multipliers results in approximately $118,000. Next slide. To calculate the base liability, the per gallon and per day assessments are added, and then enforcement policy adjustment factors based on culpability, history of violations, and cleanup and cooperation are applied. Therefore, the resulting base liability is approximately $2.4 million. Next slide. There are other considerations Waterboard staff considers when determining the final proposed liability. The first consideration is the discharger's ability to pay. CDCR has stipulated to the ability to pay penalty as they are a state agency with a budget of $13.4 billion for the current fiscal year. The next consideration is the economic benefit the discharger may have had due to noncompliance. The enforcement policy provides that the economic benefit of noncompliance should be calculated using US EPA's Economic Benefit Model, or BEN, program, unless it's demonstrated that an alternative method of calculating the economic benefit is more appropriate. For this case, BEN was determined to be the appropriate method. Using standard economic principles such as time value of money and tax deductibility of compliance costs, BEN calculates a discharger's economic benefit derived from delaying or avoiding compliance with environmental statutes. The estimated economic benefit for the violations alleged above is approximately $1.46 million. The minimum liability for a discretionary penalty is equal to the economic benefit of noncompliance plus 10%. Therefore, the minimum liability in this case is approximately $1.6 million. The maximum penalty is the sum of the statutory per day and per gallon penalties. Pursuant to the Water Code, the per day maximum penalty for 79 days of violation is $790,000, and the per gallon maximum penalty is approximately $12 million. Therefore, the maximum penalty when combining the per day and per gallon statutory penalties is a little over $12 million. The Central Valley Water Board and the discharger have agreed to settle this action in an administrative setting in lieu of engaging in a civil action, where the penalty may amount to a much larger penalty. Thus, the estimated amount generated by the enforcement policy in this matter adequately addresses the penalty exposure for the discharger. Assessing other factors as justice may require, the stipulated administrative civil liability in this case is $2.5 million to more reasonably address the alleged violations and threats to water quality and public health from the alleged violations. In addition, the stipulated penalty in this action is in excess of the estimated economic benefit plus 10%. Next slide, please. The proposed order stipulates to $2.5 million in total penalties, with $1.6 million of penalties paid to the cleanup and abatement account, and approximately $900,000 suspended in lieu of expenditures on the enhanced compliance actions identified in the proposed order. Next slide, please. The first enhanced compliance action is a project that will replace the landscape irrigation system at Mill Creek State Prison, which has exceeded its useful life. The existing system has breaches in several main lines, resulting in non-storm water flow entering the Mule Creek State Prison stormwater collection system, which eventually discharges to Mule Creek. Installing new piping for the landscape irrigation system will have the effect of eliminating non-stormwater flows, resulting from irrigation into Mule Creek. The second enhanced compliant action is a study to characterize the microbiological quality of the Mule Creek State Prison stormwater collection system discharges and any effects these discharges have on Mule Creek water quality, conducted by the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, commonly known as SQUIRP. A summary of the study will be presented after this presentation by Dr. Amy Zimmer-Foss and Dr. Steve Weisberg of SQUIRP. Next slide. Multiple comments were submitted in response to the tentative settlement agreement. Comments were submitted by US EPA, Amador County District Attorney, California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, or commonly referred to as CSPA, and Mr. David Anderson, a concerned citizen. Next slide. I will briefly discuss the main comments received regarding the proposed tentative settlement. Responses to all comments can be found in the response to comment document provided with the agenda materials. First, CSPA commented that the enforcement policy states that the non-waived portion of the penalty must be more than the economic benefit obtained by noncompliance, plus 10%. The next group of comments submitted by interested parties focused primarily on the proposed order lacking requirements for corrective action to address known issues in the stormwater and sewer systems and to prevent future discharges of wastewater to Mule Creek. Next slide. Board staff appreciate CSPA pointing out that we overlooked this requirement. Regional board staff concur with CSPA and acknowledge that this was an oversight in originally applying the enforcement policy to this settlement agreement. The original tentative order had the discharger paying $1.25 million to the cleanup and abatement account and $1.25 million allocated to enhanced compliance projects. The settlement agreement I presented was updated in order to adhere to the economic benefit requirements of the policy. After this issue was identified, the parties re-engaged the discussion of the economic benefit analysis, as this was not previously identified to be a penalty driver. The parties further examined the economic benefit analysis and have developed a revised stipulated economic benefit analysis, which was posted on the regional board's website. The amended proposed allocations, as I presented earlier, are approximately 1.6 million in penalties being paid to the cleanup and abatement account and approximately 894,000 suspended in lieu of expenditures on the enhanced compliance actions identified in the proposed order. Next slide. A concern voiced by US EPA, CSPA, Amador County, and the Amador County District Attorney is that while the order penalizes the illicit discharges cited, it does not require CDCR to complete any work that will prevent future discharges in violation of the Clean Water Act from the stormwater system. A few of their recommendations included discontinuing the discharge of stormwater containing waste constituents to Mule Creek, enhanced monitoring of the discharge, especially for dry weather flows, surface water monitoring in Mule Creek, development of a work plan to address identified leaks in the sanitary sewer and stormwater systems, and the installation of additional groundwater monitoring devices. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, this settlement only addresses discharge violations prior to obtaining coverage under the MS4 permit and is the first step in the process of bringing CDCR into compliance with their water board permits at this facility. The proposed order is not intended to be the regulatory mechanism by which those corrective actions necessary will be required. As such, the regional board has formed an internal work group comprised of representatives from all applicable programs to address ongoing compliance issues, which will include corrective actions as needed. The regional board and US EPA Office of Enforcement are collaborating across multiple programs as we are continuing to meet and identify next steps. Identifying and eliminating sources of waste constituents in the stormwater system is essential to coming into compliance with the Clean Water Act and MS4 General Order, and therefore specific actions associated with that process will be required under separate enforcement actions that are ongoing. Additionally, a recent joint inspection was conducted in November. US EPA's inspection report has recently been finalized and is available to the public upon request. Next slide. Enforcement staff are currently working to assess the prison's compliance with the Sanitary Sewer System General Order, where an ongoing investigation to ensure an adequate sanitary sewer management plan and emergency response plan is in place and that all facility staff have the appropriate training. Board staff are also gathering information regarding potential spills and potential avoided maintenance and repairs of the sanitary sewer collection system. In addition, waste discharge requirements regulating discharge from the wastewater treatment plant are scheduled to be renewed in the near term, which is intended to address groundwater impacts from the land application areas, poorly characterized industrial waste streams, the bypass of potential industrial waste constituents from the domestic wastewater treatment plant, and insufficiently sized and maintained spray fields. Enforcement and water quality monitoring is still ongoing under several water board programs. The small MS4 general permit requires new enrollees to develop a stormwater control program over a 5-year period. CDCR is currently in year 3 of the development of its program. Due to potential water quality impacts to Mule Creek, while the stormwater control program is being fully developed and implemented, and to ensure compliance with small MS4 general permit requirements,
Kelly, I've lost audio.
Still there, Carrie?
She's muted.
I shall stop this share. We're on slide 43. Carrie, you're muted.
So Carrie's one of the lucky individuals that usually has a separate phone line due to connection issues. So she may have a phone line that dropped off.
Can somebody message her?
Yeah, I
believe so.
just sent you a ask to unmute, Carrie. If you're able to unmute.
Okay.
How about now?
There we go. That works.
I love that I live up in, amongst all these trees, but they've been trouble for me this year. All right, where was I?
Slide 43.
Okay. So basically, a monitoring and reporting program was issued under Section 13383 of the Water Code in August 2020 and updated in December 2020, mostly for clarification purposes, which requires monitoring of discharges in Mule Creek surface water. Next slide, please. Lastly, Compliance and Enforcement's Brett Stevens recently inspected the facility on January 27th to ensure a no exposure certification with sufficient coverage under the Industrial Stormwater General Permit. The inspection is still in draft form, but the results are promising. The photos and documentation show that CDCR has made great strides to better maintain their industrial areas, including improved housekeeping and staff training. The site was in good condition related to stormwater on site, and it appears the no exposure certification is the appropriate coverage. The stormwater inspection report will be finalized this month and will be available to the public upon request. So as you can see, Central Valley Water Board staff are making progress in terms of compliance with water quality protection, but a lot is still left to do. There is a likelihood that the board should expect to see additional orders from Mule Creek State Prison as a result of these ongoing investigations. Next slide. Last slide. In conclusion, enforcement staff recommend adoption of the proposed settlement agreement and stipulation for CDCR's Mule Creek State Prison. I would like to enter into this record this presentation, the agenda package, and the regional board files for this facility. Myself, along with the other members of the prosecution team, are happy to answer any questions you have. And I'd like to take this time to introduce Nick Knight, who is our Office of Enforcement attorney that we've been working this case with through State Board, and he's also available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Are there any questions or comments by board members?
I guess I have, I think one of the slides referenced comments from one of the local residents. And we've had several very, I don't know, serious comments presented at our previous board meetings. So I'm wondering how they've responded to the settlement, and if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
I think to a certain extent, they can speak for themselves, or they're next on to comment.
We'll go to interested persons when we finish with testimony, Mark. And if you don't mind, we can return to your question then.
No, that was my main, I'm just.
Right, we've got a couple, we got cards from a couple of people that.
Yeah, okay, fine. That'll be fine.
Are there any further comments or questions?
This is Carmen. I have a few questions, but I'd like to wait until the other presenters go before I ask them. So thanks.
Well, once again, Carrie, thank you for a great and very involved presentation. I'd like to ask now Jane to unmute the SCORP representatives, Dr. Amy Zimmer-Faust and Dr. Weisberg. And we'll now hear a presentation by the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project representatives. And if you'd introduce yourself and say whether or not you've taken the oath.
Sure. All right, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes.
I'm Amy Zimmerfaust. I am from SCORP and I have taken the oath.
Thank you very much.
Sure. So first of all, thank you to all the members of the regional board for having us today. For those of you who don't know who SCORP is, we are a joint powers authority, which is a type of local government agency located in Southern California. And our focus is really on water quality research and development. So how did the study get started? Well, the real impetus was that Mule Creek water quality is an exceedance of state water quality standards for fecal bacteria, and that there have been previous efforts that have shown that the state prison contributes to those exceedances. So the prison and the regional board wanted to come to agreement on both the extent of the prison's contributions to those water quality exceedances in Mule Creek, and also gain clarity on potential sources of fecal bacteria within flows leaving the prison. So how does SCORP fit into this? Originally, we were brought in just to provide oversight on the study design. However, ultimately, we were asked to stay on to serve as QA/QC advisor to help analyze the data collected and to help derive conclusions from the study, which were reached in collaboration between the three groups. So we had three primary questions that the study was really designed around. First, we wanted to characterize the water quality of effluents leaving the prison. And as part of this, we also wanted to understand the impact of the prison effluents on Mule Creek water quality. Next, if the prison is impacting Mule Creek water quality, then we wanted to characterize what fecal sources are part of this contribution. And lastly, while we were there, we wanted to understand what else might be coming in upstream of the prison and also contributing to impaired water quality within Mule Creek. So for question one, we first wanted to characterize prison effluents. So we collected samples from 4 different sites, which you saw in the earlier presentation, to capture the main sources of runoff from the old prison grounds. So we collected samples from 2 sites that captured the runoff draining that prison perimeter ditch that you saw earlier. This is the ditch that runs around the prison, collecting runoff from within the prison itself. And then we also collected samples from an additional 2 sites at the ends of the 2 major stormwater conveyance channels leaving the prison. And these sites capture runoff from the prison grounds right before it enters the creek. And then in addition, to understand the prison's impact on Mule Creek water quality, we sampled 2 creek sites located just upstream and downstream of the prison on the same sampling days. So for this first question, we measured E. coli, a type of fecal indicator bacteria, and flow, because we need both high concentrations and volumes leaving the prison to have an impact on creek water quality. So the goal was to sample 30 different times with at least 10 different sampling events for 3 different flow scenarios, which were rain, post-storm, and dry weather conditions. So overall, we did achieve the sampling goals of at least 10 events per flow condition. For these events, SCORP served as the auditor with samples collected passing QA/QC. During the course of the study, SCORP did visit both the prison and the processing lab to ensure the quality of the samples collected. So for the report and this presentation, the focus is really on year 2, which was a more complete data set. However, findings were largely consistent year 1 to year 2. So what did we see? First, we were interested in the quality of the prison effluents entering the stormwater system. So here we have the average E. coli concentrations from those 4 different sites capturing prison runoff for the 3 flow conditions. What we see is that these levels are well above state water quality standards in all 3 flow conditions sampled. So water quality leaving the prison does have elevated levels of fecal bacteria well above state water quality standards. Next, we wanted to compare E. coli levels upstream and downstream of the prison to see if the prison runoff is impacting water quality in Mule Creek. Here, we saw that the water quality in Mule Creek also consistently fails water quality standards for fecal bacteria, and that the prison is having an impact in that levels overall do increase moving downstream. These are E. coli levels again. However, worth noting is that the stream did also exceed state water quality standards frequently upstream, about 40% of the time, and there were a number of sampling days where levels did not increase moving downstream past the prison. So for question 1, water quality leaving the prison is impaired, and there is potential for it to contribute to exceedances of the fecal bacteria standards in Mule Creek some of the time. So next we wanted to see what fecal sources are part of that prison contribution. So to answer this question, we sampled the same 4 sites described for question 1, which captured the runoff leaving the prison. In the same set of samples, we measured genetic markers that are associated with specific fecal sources. For this, we use genetic markers that are well established and are known to be sensitive and specific to their target fecal source. In the prison effluents, we measured markers associated with human, ruminant, which include deer and cow, and bird fecal sources. From previous observations, these were hypothesized as the likely sources. We targeted the same 30 sampling events with 10 in each flow condition for the genetic marker analysis. So what did we find? Well, birds are a primary source of fecal contamination in the prison runoff. We detected the bird genetic marker in almost 90% of samples collected from the ends of the 2 primary stormwater conveyance channels, which capture prison runoff right before it enters the creek. In addition, ruminants also appear to be a primary source of fecal contamination in the prison runoff. From those same 2 sites, the ruminant genetic marker was detected in 75% of samples. Lastly, human sources were found to be at most a very minor source of fecal contamination in the prison stormwater runoff. Human genetic marker was only detected twice in the samples collected from all 4 sites capturing prison runoff, and those 2 detections were both low level, below any threshold. So for the last question, we wanted to see what fecal sources are coming in from upstream of the prison. Our approach here was similar to the approach applied when evaluating fecal sources within the prison runoff. We measured genetic markers at the upstream prison boundary site. For this evaluation, we measured the same set of genetic markers associated with human, ruminant, and bird fecal sources. And then we also added an additional marker specific to cows because we felt that could be an additional potential source upstream. And then here again, we targeted the same 30 sampling events and the 3 different flow conditions. So what did we find? Well, overall.
Question, this is Carmen. Hi.
Sure.
If you could go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
So my question is measurement of genetic markers associated with specific fecal sources. The ruminant, you said would have caught sort of cows, and is that like general animals, and then the cow is a more specific one?
You're exactly right. So ruminant, deer, cow, sheep, but because we were specifically interested in cows as like a potential source that could be mitigated, we included a marker that's also just specific to cows. But just yeah.
All right. I just want to make sure I understood right. Thank you
for that clarification. Yeah. So here's where we were. And I was just telling you that we saw very similar trends in terms of fecal sources coming in upstream to what we saw in the prison runoff. We detected both the bird and ruminant genetic markers here in 100% of samples collected at that upstream boundary location. And then we also detected the cow-specific marker, particularly during wet weather, meaning that cows are a likely source contributing upstream of the prison. And lastly, we detected the human genetic marker infrequently, just twice out of all the samples collected at the site, and at low levels, below any threshold, meaning that human is an unlikely source upstream of the prison. So we'll end on the 3 questions that this study was designed to address, and it's our hope that the information presented has been useful to you and has provided some clarity on these topics, and we are more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I don't have a question, but this is Carmen. I'll just say that the way that it was presented was really easy to follow and understand. And so I appreciate that.
Okay, great. That was our hope.
And I really appreciate staff ensuring that SCORP became involved in this project. I think the kinds of data we've been presented make our decision much clearer than it would have been otherwise. Okay. Unless there are more questions from board members, and hearing none, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from interested persons. Janelle, are there any wishes? Well, I was going to ask if there's any individual wishing to comment at this time. I see that you have cards for 4 individuals.
Yes.
Okay.
Sally Barron is the first.
Right. So let's start with Sally Barron. Sally Barron, could you unmute and please identify yourself? Tell you, just state your affiliation and say whether or not you've taken the oath.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Yes, we can.
Yes, I have taken the oath.
Thank you.
I have a few comments here. The state water boards, of which you are one, were created and charged to preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of the water resources for the protection of the environment, public health, and all beneficial uses for the benefit of present and future generations. To do this, the water boards were given wide-ranging enforcement powers with a great deal of latitude in using these powers. This application of these powers has been vigorous in finding and prosecuting violators in the private sector, excuse me. This has not been the case with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The CDCR were a private company. Years ago, they would have been attacked with vigor, hounded into bankruptcy, and the people responsible charged with criminal and put in jail, totally destroyed. With Mule Creek State Prison, this has not been the case. This is because the CDCR is a fellow state agency, my question. This looks like collusion between the Water Board and CDCR to permit business as usual, with the raw sewage dumping into Mule Creek and contaminating domestic wells as it has been for years. The prison irrigation system is not the problem. The work being done by the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project is not the answer. It is experimental, and the Water Board's abdication of responsibility to fulfill this stated purpose is the problem. Tell the Water Board to do their jobs. The CDCR has been running the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board for the last 27 years. Other than a couple of feeble attempts to look good, they are issuing notices of violation, but they don't follow up on them. And no, CDCR is going to fix the irrigation. The topic has been dumped into the creek because the outdated, antiquated sewage treatment plant cannot handle the load and can't handle industrial waste. The only real solution to this ongoing crisis is for the board to accept its responsibility and to go after CDCR. After the state boards have done, all the state boards have done to many private companies and driven them out of California. CDCR is not exempt because it is a state agency. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I have a card from David Anderson.
Can you hear me?
Hear you well.
Thank you, Dr. Longley. I have taken the oath. I'm David Anderson, representing myself. It has been a little over 3 years since the Water Board staff identified a variety of illicit materials being discharged into Mule Creek at the Mule Creek Prison via the storm drain system. In 3 years, CDCR has done nothing to reduce or eliminate the illicit discharges. CDCR has defied numerous Water Board orders directing CDCR to identify, repair, and monitor the facility. Equally shameful is this water board's efforts to enforce compliance. Today, you intend to approve an administrative civil liability order to address past violations that is rife with inaccuracies, omissions, erroneous conclusions, and false data. Board staff indicate that ongoing violations will be addressed in separate enforcement actions. Given this board's past performance, that instills little confidence. Board staff was advised in June 2018 that the source of most of the illicit discharge from the storm drain system was originating from the sanitary sewer system underneath all of the buildings in the facility. Staff agreed, yet no investigation to look under any buildings has occurred as of this date. Instead, CDCR and their consultants have misdirected attention to bogus claims not founded on any empirical data. They have propagated the false narrative that high groundwater is transporting contaminants from the leaky irrigation and/or high groundwater from non-specific sources. That is a patent lie. The workers that installed all of these systems in 1987 have indicated no groundwater was present. The sewer system exceeded 15 feet deep and they encountered no water. To underscore this fact, CDCR was directed to implement a piezometer installation plan to monitor groundwater. It has not been done. To further cloud the issue, CDCR consultants consistently refer to all the subterranean water as groundwater. Subterranean leaks in sewer, storm, and water systems are just exfiltration from those systems and not groundwater. When the MS4 was granted, it was incumbent on CDCR to monitor, identify, and eliminate illicit discharge from their stormwater flow. No actions have been undertaken by CDCR since the MS4 approval in April of 2019. It appears inappropriate to apply an ACLO in order to address past violations when the problems have not been addressed at all. The same exact conditions that existed before the issuance of the MS4 exist after the issuance of the MS4. I don't believe that the MS4 permit grants absolution merely by its issuance. In April of 2019, this board heard promises from Mr. Palupa that the MS4 would facilitate identification and elimination of the illicit discharge through mandates required of the MS4 permit. Clearly, that has not been the case. Finally, I asked several weeks ago what relevance the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project study has considering identification of fecal sources. That identification of fecal sources is not a factor in enforcement. Staff indicated they were too busy to answer. Perhaps an explanation is in order. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, sir. Next, I have a card from Andrew Packard.
Andrew is unmuted.
Good morning, Chairman Langley and members of the board. Thank you for taking the time to consider these comments. Our first comment relates to the fact that—
Sir, could you identify yourself and say whether you've taken the oath?
Yes.
Thank you.
I've taken the oath. My name is Andrew Packard, and I represent California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance in a federal court action intended to correct the violations that are not corrected here.
Thank you.
We previously submitted comments in August of 2019 regarding the many shortcomings of the settlement. The revised settlement has all of those same shortcomings, and I don't intend to repeat our comments here. However, I did want to bring to your attention a number of things that have not been mentioned in the board's discussion of this settlement today. There's a blatant violation of the enforcement policy by failing to identify and correct the violation at issue. As Mr. Anderson pointed out, notwithstanding the regional board's own staff pointing out that the sources of the contamination of stormwater are not irrigation and groundwater, but rather indirect cross-contamination from the sanitary and waste systems crossing over into the stormwater system. That's a serious problem. It's been a problem for 20 years. Now we're coming to the end of a regional board process that's lasted 3 years, and the problem is not corrected. Your own policy, your enforcement policy says that you need to do that. The regional board's response to the comments said, well, we're going to address that by other mechanisms. What are those mechanisms? Where are they now? How many years are they going to take? The other comments from the regional board in response to our comments that came out a little while ago. Oh, and I should also mention, as proof that this problem's not corrected, you had an 11 million gallon spill just last month. 11 million gallons. Telling the discharger to correct the problem, quote, numerous times, hasn't fixed it. And they're thumbing their nose at you because they know they can as a large state agency. This needs to stop. Our second primary problem with the settlement is that the ECAs involved don't address the problem. The ECA set forth in attachment B concerns irrigation. Again, you're chasing the wrong problem. It's not irrigation. It's indirect cross-contamination in the subsurface conveyances at the facility. And calling it groundwater, as Mr. Anderson pointed out, is incorrect and misleading. The work plan, the landscape irrigation system replacement set forth in attachment B is apparently 4 years, has 4 years to complete. And there's a question, why give them 4 years to correct the problem? Even though it doesn't correct the problem, as we previously stated. I just want to read a quote from the revised ACL that says, Waterboard staff does not believe that the identified stormwater sources of irrigation and groundwater are likely sources of waste constituents. In 25 years of watching this agency, I've never seen a process so at odds with what its own staff is finding. Instead of following the science, you seem to be going out of your way to give this large state agency very wide berth, to the detriment of everyone in Ione and everyone who relies on Mule Creek and Dry Creek, its downstream tributary. Attachment C, the other ECA regarding the microbiological quality of Mule Creek, is frankly a waste of time. The Clean Water Act doesn't care where all this fecal coliform is coming from. We already know, we've studied this problem for years. We already know that it's cross-contamination from the wastewater system from an old and undersized wastewater treatment plant. Finally, there's no comment from the regional board regarding our comments on the need to study dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, aquatic toxicity, and additive toxicity, all of which are needed to quantify the impacts on Mule Creek. I had one other comment I wanted to make. I don't know how I'm doing on time.
You've run over by about a minute, sir.
Okay, if I can just make one last comment with your indulgence.
Very quickly.
Thank you. The ACL, the revised ACL attempts to correct, as Ms. Holmes pointed out, our issues regarding the non-waived portion of the penalty. And I just want to point out to the board itself that what has been, I thank the regional board for responding to our comment, but what they've done is just cook the books. They have taken out two of the key $700,000 of avoided costs in their economic benefit model and just cut them. They were previously stipulated to, and they simply allowed $700 of avoided costs to disappear so that they could lower the avoided costs in the economic benefit model and therefore make the non-waived portion of the penalty line up correctly. And that's not complying with the enforcement policy, and it's not consistent with what you would expect from a recalcitrant violator like CDCR. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Packard. We'll move on to the next card. Diane Rotten, please.
Sorry, Dr. Longley, we have no one here by that name. I saw the blue card entry, but not online.
Not online. Okay. Is there anyone here representing the city of Ione? Seeing none, are there any other individuals wishing to testify? I normally ask that when we're in session together, but right now folks would have a difficult time getting in if they haven't sent in their emails already. So
they may raise their hands if they wish to, or use the *9 option on their cell phones.
So I'm looking for a raised hand or a *9 option. Is there anyone else wishing to testify? We're not seeing any. If not,
No response, Dr. Longley.
okay. Are there any questions from board members of any of the individuals who have testified? Hearing none, I'll go on.
Dr. Longley, I'm trying to get on here.
Okay.
Yes, based on the public comments, the discharges, one of the ladies mentioned earlier, the discharges into the public or private wells. And I wanted to ask staff, is there any truth to that?
There's no impacts to domestic wells due to these discharges. I think if Carrie, if you can verify that, but there's no impacts to domestic wells that the board's aware of. In years past, there was a cleanup case involving a solvent discharge, which was unrelated to the discharges that are at issue for this settlement. I don't know, Carrie, if you could speak to that.
Terry's probably trying to get online.
Okay, that's okay. I think that's fine.
Any further questions or comments by board members?
Yes, I'd like to have a little clarification on the issue of cross-contamination. Based on the fecal genetic marker analysis, and I read through the report that indicated there is some trenching that incorporates both industrial and sanitary sewer pipes with stormwater pipes. I mean, the potential seems to have been there from the way it was constructed. But do I understand from the coliform analysis that the board is ruling out that as a source of downstream contamination in Mule Creek?
So I think what the study definitively showed, as far as we're concerned, is that there's no direct cross-contamination between the piping as kind of was initially alleged back in January of 2018. We have very trace amounts of human fecal coliform indicators showing up in just a couple of the many samples that were collected at the facility. That's not indicative of a direct cross-contamination issue. Now, there may be indirect cross-contamination issue of some E. coli from human sources making its way either from the spray fields or through, surfacing groundwater, but that does not appear to be the driver of the contaminants in the non-stormwater flows. The non-stormwater flows are coming from somewhere. We are continuing to hold CDCR to investigate and eliminate those non-stormwater flows pursuant to the course of action laid out in the MS4 program. They're kind of in year 2 of the development under that statewide program. But I think all in all, our focus is not primarily on a direct cross-contamination from the sewer system. It is on, CDCR, like any other MS4 system, investigating and eliminating all non-stormwater discharges into its stormwater system.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments by board members?
So I'm asking another question. This is in regards to the last gentleman that spoke and made reference to the 11 million gallons of discharge still happening. Do we still have issues of that sort, Patrick or Carrie?
So the 11 million gallons is a commingled number that was reported recently to the Office of Emergency Services. That's enhanced in reporting that the board directed CDCR to make. It's not 11 million gallons of sewage or 11 million gallons of direct discharge from their sewage being discharged to the creek. That is stormwater flows that have the potential to commingle with the outflow, the dry weather flow that we see coming out of their system, the stuff that was recorded back in January of 2018. And so we're asking them to report all of that to Office of Emergency Services. that's a violation. The non-stormwater flows, that is a concern to the board, and is something that we're continuing to work on. But that's not the subject of this enforcement action. It very well could be something that could be brought in front of the board at a later time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, Denise, or any of the other board members?
I have a brief, maybe a question from the new guy to some degree here. Is this common practice to sort of segment potential enforcement actions? Certainly there's a period of time for which the settlement agreement covers, but certainly there are ongoing issues, it sounds like. Is it normal course of practice to segment it this way?
I think there's a lot of enforcement actions that are segmented across, particularly when you have an NPDES facility where there's an ongoing discharge. A lot of the publicly owned treatment works that have mandatory minimum penalties and discretionary penalties in which they are upgrading their permits, upgrading their facilities. It's going to be multiple enforcement actions that we segment one after the other as they deal with different components of their permit. Here, there's actually a few permitting components in play. What we have in front of the board today is really the bulk of the discharges that occurred when they were under no permit or the wrong permit. And now that they are under a different permitting regime after the enforcement action that we instigated triggered those actions, we have kind of a different platform to add additional compliance options in. The standard under the MS4 permit is not the normal standard that you see from an NPDES permit. It's elimination of non-stormwater flows to the maximum extent practicable. That is a somewhat iterative program that they're undertaking. They have to ultimately comply with water quality objectives. But I think what we're seeing here is that there's actually exceedances in the water body as well. That's something that the board would have to address in a more comprehensive manner, taking a look at what the upstream and downstream sources are as well. I think Mr. Packard and Mr. Anderson are both absolutely accurate in that does not let CDCR off the hook just because there's already exceedances in the upstream water before it crosses their facility. But again, that's something that we'll be continuing to look at from an enforcement perspective as we move forward with additional actions, including upgrading the spray fields, including the continued work under the MS4 and continuing investigations to verify compliance with the industrial permits that they have at the facility.
Thank you.
Any further questions from board members? Seeing none, question for board members. Mr. Anderson and Mr. Packard have raised their hands. They've already provided testimony. Does any board member wish to have further testimony by either of those individuals?
Dr. Longley, I have no problem with we're here to address this issue. So I would not have a problem with them
Okay,
addressing
I'll
the issue.
call first on Mr. Anderson. Please keep your comments very brief.
Thank you, Dr. Longley. I raised my hand to respond to the board member that was asking about well contamination.
Right.
And I was hoping Mr. Croyle or Kerry could have responded. There was a requirement from the Water Board for CDCR to do domestic well sampling in early 2018. They did one and actually refused to do any more. There was a requirement that for them to do 8 semi-annually. And after that one, they didn't do any more. The interesting thing was of the one test of the wells in the neighborhood that were done, there were elevated levels of total coliforms, but in particular, there was evidence of benzoic acid in all of the wells, which is the source can be traced back to the sewer outflow coming out of the storm drain system. I think that was the relevant part.
Very good. And thank you for that information. And I see Kerry's back on. Kerry, have you heard any testimony you desire to address?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Mr. Anderson is correct that there was minimal well testing done, drinking water well supply system done. There was some pushback from CBCR, and the regional board staff actually went out and did their own well sampling and came back with data. And again, that's an ongoing investigation. I hate to say at this time that there's any definitive answer as to the impacts to those wells, but we are investigating those wells. It's ongoing.
Thank you very much. I'll call on David Anderson.
I think that was Mr. Anderson, Mr. Packard.
I mean, Mr. Packard, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chairman Langley. My question goes to a comment made by Mr. Palupa, who said that the violations at issue in this settlement relate to the early period where the discharges at issue were not permitted. Doesn't that suggest to the board that that the highest penalty factor should be applied instead of the very lowest? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, sir. Are there any further questions by members of the board?
So I would answer that by saying that the means in which the violations are tabulated are contained in the enforcement policy. That's the attachment in front of the board, and that's certainly, Nick can comment on that more, but that's absolutely the enforcement posture that we pursued here, was that they were not appropriately permitted when those discharges occurred. That's a factor that was absolutely taken into account via the penalty matrix.
And David Anderson, did you have a reply that you wanted to make?
You may unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Hear you. Yes.
Okay, yeah, and just one last point to follow on to what Carrie said, to give you a sense of the gravity of the groundwater situation. In 2006, there was a dry cleaning chemical detected in the most immediate well that's located on Collins Road that was at the prison property line. And that contamination was severe enough that Department of Corrections offered to extend domestic water from the Amador Water Agency to those affected residences, because those wells are so contaminated, they're not fit for human consumption. So there are effects to the wells in the immediate vicinity that were addressed in 2006. And the Amador County Environmental Health Department are the ones who identified the likely source was from the dry cleaning plant. The dry cleaning plant discontinued operations from that point forward. I just wish the Environmental Health Department had had the insight to realize that the dry cleaning chemicals were not deposited in the well, probably resulted in a subterranean transmission across the property line.
No, thank you, Mr. Anderson. That's absolutely what I was referring to when I mentioned those domestic well impacts. Those are not subject of this enforcement action. The replacement water was certainly a component that was addressed back in 2006, something we continually take a look at. This action in front of us today, even though there was minimal sampling done, we're not seeing necessarily impacts due to the violations contained in this settlement agreement to domestic wells. But you're absolutely right. That is certainly a separate matter in what I was talking about. And that is in the record in front of the board. But it's good to acknowledge that. Again, I think there's a number of issues that are still ongoing. The upgrades to the spray fields hopefully deals more head on with the groundwater issues here. The surface water discharge really is all about the E. coli in that storm sewer system and how it's been discharging to surface waters. Again, and we take a look at it, I think it's it's encouraging that there's a robust enough dialogue here that we're talking about whether a $2.5 million penalty is significant enough. I know that's actually a fairly healthy posture to take. Usually it's whether, some token settlement of, several $1,000s or something like that would be robust enough. $2.5 million, at least according to the enforcement policy and according to the types of actions that this board undertakes, is a significant penalty. It is a significant penalty for this facility. It's the reason why I continue to support this settlement. And I think it also in recognition of the fact that there are additional violations that do not fall within the scope of this settlement action. So $2.5 million is not the cap on liability for CDCR for all the activities that occurred and have subsequently occurred at Mule Creek. It just is for these violations that occurred when they were under no permit or the wrong permit for this facility. But again, I think it is reliant on the board's discretion in terms of whether they want to move ahead with this particular enforcement strategy or not. Again, my endorsement is for this particular settlement to move forward for the prosecution team, Carrie, JJ, and the Office of Enforcement, working with US EPA to continue to provide oversight and prosecution where necessary of violations at Mule Creek. But I think that's my position. I actually, very grateful to all the commenters here. I know that we may have a difference of opinion as to the adequacy of this particular settlement, but their continued focus over the years on these issues at Mule Creek is partially what led to the focus of the Waterboards enforcement actions on these violations and on getting CDCR on track to get into compliance with water quality objectives. We still have loose ends here. Like Carrie mentioned, there's still ongoing violations. There's still a matter of non-stormwater entering into the stormwater system, which is not supposed to happen. We recognize in every system across the state that does happen. That's kind of, they're not separate storm sewer systems are not impervious to rising groundwater, to leaks. Every sewer system leaks. Every storm sewer system is not completely immune to infiltration. But that's still something that has to be done. It has to be verified. It has to be checked out, and it has to be prosecuted. In addition, the MS4 unit here at the board added additional monitoring under 13383 of the Water Code to even enhance what the MS4 permits required. Were ongoing permit upgrades for the spray fields. And again, the prosecution unit is working with US EPA to maintain oversight of the system that Mule Creek has out there today.
Thank you very much. At this point in time, we'll move on to your recommendation, and then I'll close the hearing.
Yeah, my recommendation at this point is for the board to adopt this enforcement action, to approve this settlement, and to continue to provide oversight. It's not contained within the four corners of the settlement, but certainly you have my commitment, the commitment of Carrie and JJ and the Office of Enforcement to continue their oversight of Mule Creek to make sure that they do come into permit compliance, that we continue to assess this watershed, and also that we continue to look at upstream and downstream impacts. If there's a signature coming in from bovine and from other E. coli sources upstream of the prison, that's something that we're interested in as well, and something that we want to work to get that addressed too.
Thank you very much. At this point, the hearing's closed. Discussion will be confined to the board members, and I am waiting for a motion to be made and a second to that motion.
Dr. Longley, this is Carmen. I'd like to make a statement just before I make a motion. I remember when during like a 3-minute public comment, this issue first came up. I remember being on the dais and thanking the lady that drove so far to be there to talk to us in this short 3-minute period. So, CDC may have been under the radar for years, but they are invisible no longer. So while this doesn't solve everything, I do think that it's a reasonable step today. And I expect that the issues not covered in the period within the settlement agreement will continue to be investigated and looked at, because again, this is now, a place that a light has been shown on. So, settlement agreements are never perfect. They never quite feel like home runs. They also don't feel like strikeouts. So it's not perfect, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So I think given the science that I heard today, which I found to be reliable, based on all that, I would make a motion to approve the settlement agreement as presented.
That's the settlement agreement and the stipulation for entry of administrative civil liability order. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Do I have a second?
Second, Dr. Longley.
Carmen's made the motion and Raji has seconded. Is there further discussion?
I'd just like to comment briefly here. I've only been on the board for a little more than 2 years, I guess, but this is the largest penalty I've seen imposed on anybody. So I don't think it's fair to state that the board's treating a state agency any different than private entities, at least since I've been here. Number one. Number two, there are obviously a lot of ongoing issues, and I think the prison's been getting off the hook for many years, and maybe they got a little too comfortable. This is certainly going to get their attention, and it's a shot across the bow. And I think they're on notice that there's more enforcement to come if they don't perform according to the agreement. So with that said, I'm in support of this agreement, as Carmen indicated. Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. So.
Mark, I could be wrong, but I think the largest ACL that this board has passed has been 3 million. So you're right on. The 2.5 million is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Any further?
Yeah, Dr. Longley, I certainly remember this issue very, very well. And what strikes me is that while we're in an agreement mode to work with this group, and we're working within the confines of our charge, I'm appreciative of what the staff has done in bringing this before the board and the steps that are taking to make sure it's permitted and that we do have an eye on the issue. But it's also worthy of noting that the residents have brought these issues forward. It's been a concern in their community for quite some time. And I'm just appalled at the fact that the state prison system is still not doing everything they can to improve the situation, but pushing things down the road. So let's move forward with this effort. But we really want to make sure that Mule Creek is doing its job. To the residents, I will encourage you to continue to put the pressure on to make sure that this matter does well. It won't go away with the position that's going to be taken today. But anything that you continue to see, continue to bring it before the board, and we're the ones that can help in addressing this issue here with water quality and the permits and the things that we will be voting for today will be a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments?
I would just add, I agree with Member Kadar. I too, obviously being my first meeting, I feel compelled to say that I expect that government agencies hold themselves to a higher standard. And Member Ramirez, I agree with you and Mr. Bradford's comments about not letting the perfect get in the way of the good. But I just want to say that the important thing here is this issue be remedied, and it be remedied in a timely and responsible manner.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Board Member Bradford,
Yes.
Board Member Brar,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Yang,
Aye.
Board Member Avdis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ramirez,
Yes.
and Chair Longley.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank everyone very much for the amount of hard work that's been put in on this item, and certainly the board needs to continue, the board members need to continue this item very closely, because as has been pointed out, we need to ensure that the community of Ione has a remedy to the problems that are occurring in the creek. Where they come from has to be fully determined and documented. Further action taken as necessary. Thank you very much. We're ready to move on to agenda item 9, and it's just a few minutes before noon. We could take a break. I have an issue, and that's that at 1:15, I'm supposed to show up for my second shot for COVID-19, and I pleaded with my physician and asked him to give me another time, and I was told absolutely no. You're one of the shots in the bottle. You will be here or you won't get it. So I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. We can continue. We would probably need definitely a short break right now, but we could continue after that. Patrick, how long do you think this item will take?
I think the presentation by board staff is relatively brief. I think Clay, correct me if I'm wrong, it's under 20 minutes.
Okay, so what I'll do is pass. Well, first of all, we will take a 5-minute break. Be back here at 5 after, not 5 after, at 5 minutes till, and we will start. And if I have to walk out, I will. I've been close to this. I want to hear the whole thing if possible, but Vice Chair Ramirez will take the gavel. Thank you, and be back in 5 minutes, please. Okay. We're back in session. Wait for the other board members to make sure they're all here. I see Mark. I see Nick. Denise, are you there? Carmen? Carmen's here. Denise? Sean, are you here?
Dr. Longley, I'm here.
Great, great.
I'm just messing with the computer.
Don't mess with the computer.
Were you trying to do a cute filter, Denise, like a cat filter? Or...
Hey, once my husband actually put a sky in the background with all the stars and stuff, and it was the weirdest things, like, take it off.
Yeah. I've seen that. People have like northern lights behind them, and it's, you know.
Yeah.
Sean, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, thank you. And Raji, is she with us? It's not like the old days when you can just look down the dais and see who's there.
Now that was the old days.
The old days, yeah. Probably the only benefit out of using this platform. Denise was talking about the individual who drove a long ways to come talk to us for 3 minutes. And
That was Carmen.
or Carmen was, yeah.
Yeah.
And at least people can get online without. So I hope we can retain, as we go back to the so-called normal way of holding these meetings, I would hope that we can retain that feature one way or another.
Yeah.
I know we've heard from the governor's office that they're committed to doing that as they work forward with.
It really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Longley, I think that we, even at our previous meeting, we had all those people from Terabella. And to imagine what kind of a length of drive that would be for them to appear, just almost makes me think they either couldn't have come or would have, you know, just sat with that sort of uncomfortableness of not being able to be heard. So I see a lot of benefit in this.
Right.
I do miss, you know, sort of seeing everybody and, you know, having lunch together, but, you know,
Right.
having a yogurt, you know.
There's Mimi, there's Raji. Okay, we're on our way. This is agenda item 9. As I mentioned earlier, if we run more than about 55 minutes from now, I'll be asking Vice Chair Ramirez to take the gavel. At this point, the board will hear an update on the Food Safety Project white paper and expert panel recommendations. That is agenda item number 9 in your package. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. After the staff presentation, members of the expert panel are invited to speak. Following expert panel members, an agriculture and oil field representative will be invited to speak. Interested persons will then be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
We see you, Josh.
Thank you. Rebecca,
Can you hear me?
we'll be starting it today. Perfect.
We can hear you, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. I'll begin now. So good afternoon, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Rebecca Asami, and I'm an engineering geologist in the Fresno office. Today's presentation will be given by myself and Josh Mahoney, a water resource control engineer, also in the Fresno office. Item is to provide the board with an overview of the food safety project and the white paper on the reuse of field produced water for the irrigation of food crop, Kern County. Henceforward, this document will be referred to as the white paper. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken by the board. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Should be showing slide 2.
For this presentation, I will begin by discussing the water being reused in the land where related discharges are taking place. Next, I will introduce the Food Safety Project and the Food Safety Expert Panel. Then Josh and I will discuss the white paper, which summarizes the whole project, including the tasks or studies completed for the project, the recommendations of the Food Safety Expert Panel, and the identified data gaps. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to discuss produced water and the water we use for food safety related projects. Fluids that come out of oil production wells generally include crude oil and water. The water is often referred to as produced water. Produced water is a byproduct, but usually comprises the majority of the fluids that come up during production. Typical produced water is too high in boron and salt for agricultural use. The graphic on this slide compares total dissolved solids, or TDS, and boron concentrations in various types of water. Analyzing water for TDS is a common way of measuring water for saltiness. The purple numbers are concentrations of TDS and boron from a produced water disposal facility in the McKittrick oil field. These values are not uncommon to produced water in general. The blue numbers are typical concentrations for water reused in food safety related projects. The green numbers represent values typical for groundwater sourced in the region northeast of Bakersfield. The white numbers show typical values of boron and TDS concentrations in water sourced from the Frank-Kern Canal, and the yellow numbers are typical seawater concentrations. As you can see, the produced water reused for food safety related projects is much more similar to Frank-Kern Canal water than produced water, even produced water sourced from just the other side of the Central Valley. Slide 4, please. The discharge and reuse of produced water is regulated by the Central Valley Water Board via Waste Discharge Requirements, or WDRs. The produced water comes from oil fields located north of the Kern River. The aerial image on the slide highlights the land currently under WDRs, which authorize irrigation with produced water. Bakersfield and the Kern River are labeled here for reference. The irrigated land is north of Bakersfield and southeast of Delano. So the red area is the North Kern Water Storage District. The orange area is the Coelho Water District. The purple area is the Kern-Tulare Water District, which includes an area operated by the Jasmine Water Company. The green shaded area is the Sherwood Project, which is the latest of these types of projects to receive WDRs. The Sherwood Project did not begin to discharge until 2020. And again, the water we use for these projects is not typical produced water. It's much lower in salt and boron, and that is key to it being usable for crop irrigation. Next slide. So currently there are approximately 94,000 acres of cropland in Kern County where produced water is reused for irrigation. Crops irrigated with produced water are listed on this slide and arranged in order based on the acreage of land used to grow each crop type. The largest acreage is attributed to citrus, followed by almonds, grapes, and pistachios. Crops with the least amount of irrigated acreage include apples, tomatoes, cherries, and then root crops, which include garlic, carrots, and potatoes. Next slide. This slide summarizes the Food Safety Project. The Food Safety Project was an evaluation of the practice of using produced water to irrigate food crops. In response to growing concerns of staff and stakeholders, and out of an abundance of caution, board staff looked deeper into the practice of produced water reuse for irrigation. Many of the topics germane to the project, such as public health, fall outside the expertise of board staff, and so board staff convened the Food Safety Expert Panel, or PANEL. As part of the project, 3 studies, referred to as Task 1 through 3, were conducted to evaluate this practice. Task 1 was an overview of chemicals that may be found in produced water. Task 2 was a literature review, and Task 3 was a crop study that was initiated after independent crop studies were conducted on behalf of the Coelho Water District. In these studies, EnviroTalks examined citrus, root crops, and the quality of produced water. These studies, as in the studies conducted on behalf of Coelho. I will discuss the tasks in more details further on in the presentation. A lot of the project work from the staff side involved helping to organize meetings to inform the public and facilitate communication between panel members. Staff also presented updates on the food safety project during regular board meetings. Next slide. As mentioned previously, as a part of the project, staff convened the food safety expert panel. This slide shows panel members, their affiliations, and titles. The panel included members working for the Waterboard sister agencies such as the California Department of Public Health, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and a representative working for the U.S. EPA. Members also included those working for private consulting firms and agricultural and environmental advocacy organizations. The panel members hold expertise in fields such as toxicology, regional wildlife, food, agriculture, food safety risk assessment, and public health. The board also contracted Dr. William Stringfellow, a research engineer from Berkeley National Laboratory, to act as a science advisor. Dr. Stringfellow also has over 35 years experience in wastewater treatment and management and was a lead scientist on the SB4 scientific study evaluating hydraulic fracturing in California. Next slide. As part of the food safety project, the board entered into a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, with dischargers of produced water. Under the MOU, technical aspects of the studies or tasks were overseen by board staff with input from the panel, and the dischargers funded the work. The dischargers were not allowed to give the consultants feedback or direction on any of the technical issues related to the work. GSI Environmental Incorporated, or GSI, was the third-party consultant chosen to complete tasks 1 through 3 as a part of this project. Next slide, please. In order to update the public and be transparent of our process, board staff hosted several public meetings, generally once a quarter, throughout the duration of the project. Members of the public could attend and ask questions in person or watch online and submit questions via email. The meetings covered many aspects of the project, such as updates of crop sampling events and results, presentations and updates of task work and the white paper, presentations by external researchers such as Dr. Gary Banuelos, a plant nutritionist with the United States Department of Agriculture, a research group which included members from Duke University and RTI. That group looked at produced water, surface water, and soils in Kern County, and EnviroTalks, who conducted crop studies on behalf of the Coelho Water District, which we mentioned earlier in the presentation. We also heard presentations by special interest groups and advocacy groups. A brief discussion of the Duke University study and the EnviroTalks studies are included in the white paper prepared by staff. In addition to these public meetings, Waterboard staff organized numerous working meetings with the panel to get additional feedback and input specific to panel member expertise. Recordings of the public meetings and important documents are posted online on the Waterboard's food safety webpage, and there's a link to that at the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to begin the discussion of the white paper, which was prepared by staff and the science advisor. The white paper has been reviewed by the panel, who provided staff with comments. The most current version of the white paper has been provided to the public and is out for public comment now. Some of the major sections of the white paper include the work and findings for tasks 1, 2, and 3, data gaps identified by the panel and GSI, panel member recommendations, and project conclusions. This information will be discussed in more detail in the upcoming slides, starting with a summary of the tasks. Next slide, please. The work conducted under Task 1 identified 399 chemicals associated with. This list was based on categories. Category is naturally researched known naturally occurring chemicals in water.
Sorry, Rebecca, you're breaking up a little bit right there.
Okay.
Maybe try
Rebecca?
turning your video off.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't you cut your video and so that it concentrates on the audio portion? Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Sounds good.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. The work conducted under Task 1 identified 399 chemicals associated with produced water. This list is based on 2 categories. The first category is naturally occurring chemicals. GSI researched known naturally occurring chemicals and produced water based on published and peer-reviewed literature. The second category is oil field additives. Central Valley Water Board staff issued orders to dischargers and chemical manufacturers under California Water Code Section 13267. These orders required the disclosure of the chemical makeup of additives used during petroleum exploration, production, and treatment. After a review of the 399 chemicals, GSI completed a preliminary hazard assessment to generate the chemicals of interest list. This list identified 143 chemicals that needed to be further evaluated. This evaluation was completed in the work conducted for Task 2. Next slide. Task 2 was a comprehensive review of the chemicals of interest by review of government and peer-reviewed technical documents and databases. The goal of Task 2 was to investigate potential hazards from ingestion, persistence in agricultural ecosystems, and the potential for plant uptake of the chemicals of interest. Task 2 consisted of identification of potential sources of chemicals of interest, a review of water quality information for local surface water and produced water permitted for irrigation, a review of available fate and transport information, an evaluation of potential degradation and reaction products, and a review of known plant uptake properties with attention paid to the anticipated uptake of organic versus inorganic chemicals of interest. The available data and literature review for Task 2 did not indicate that there are concerns related to the presence of chemicals of interest at elevated levels in the blended irrigation water. Also, while some of the chemicals of interest have the potential for plant uptake, the available evidence does not indicate that this has or will occur at higher rates than when using conventional sources of irrigation water. Next slide. The goal of Task 3 was to conduct an in-depth analysis of crops irrigated with this produced water. This effort was initiated after similar crop sampling studies were conducted by Envirotox on behalf of Coelho Water District. Crop samples for Task 3 were collected from 2017 through 2019. There were 2 main sample groups: the treated samples, which are crops irrigated with produced water, and control samples, which were crops not irrigated with produced water and irrigated instead with conventional sources such as pumped groundwater and canal source surface water. Samples were collected by a third-party team and events were observed by Water Board staff. Staff retained samples before shipping them to the laboratory. Analytical results compiled for Task 3 showed that the majority of the analytes were non-detect in all crops sampled. Of the detectable results, GSI determined that their presence could not be directly attributed to irrigation water source. This was similar to the findings of independent crop studies conducted on behalf of Coelho Water District by Envirotox. The results of Task 3 also found that the overall chemical profiles are similar for treated and control crop groups. Also, levels of constituents detected in crop studies in Task 3 are within ranges expected for food supplies in the United States. Finally, based on the results of this task and other tasks, GSI determined that there was no evidence of elevated risk to human health as a result of consuming crops grown with this water. While the work completed under the Food Safety Project does include data gaps, an evaluation of the data and subsequent findings are consistent between the literature review and the crop sampling studies. In addition, the findings from the tasks are similar to the findings published by researchers from Duke University and RTI in collaboration with others. This study was published in 2020 and reached similar conclusions to those presented in the white paper. That concludes my portion of the presentation. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to Josh Mahoney. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I will continue the presentation discussing some of the remaining sections in the white paper. While the work under the Food Safety Project consisted of a comprehensive review using the best available science, GSI and the panel identified the following data gaps related to the Food Safety Project. For this slide, I will read the title of each data gap followed by a brief description. Data gap number 1. The mass data of the chemicals was not available. Central Valley Waterboard staff did not require chemical manufacturers to submit the mass data of individual oilfield additives since this information is considered a trade secret. Since this data was not available, the mass of each chemical in produced water from oilfield additives was not used in the hazard evaluation. This issue related to trade secret claims will be discussed in more detail later in this presentation. Number 2, limited data available related to plant uptake. As discovered during the Task 2 evaluation, select chemicals of interest had limited data available with regard to plant uptake and physiology. This limited data provided challenges for the evaluation of some of the chemicals of interest to determine if there was a threat to crop safety or human health related to plant uptake. Number 3, potential long-term impacts to soil and plants. Under the Food Safety Project, the potential accumulation of chemicals of interest in the soil was not fully evaluated due to the scale of work needed to complete this task. Number 4, chemicals with no toxicity data or analytical method. Under tasks 1 and 2, some of the chemicals did not have toxicity data or approved analytical methods. Since these chemicals cannot be analyzed or do not have a known toxicity threshold, GSI was unable to determine whether the chemicals are present in produced water or at a concentration that may pose a threat to crop safety or human health. And number 5, transformation and degradation products of chemicals. Under Task 2, a complete assessment of all transformation and degradation products was not able to be completed due to the scale of work needed to accomplish this task. Therefore, there is the potential for additional chemicals and constituents to be present in the produced water reused for irrigation that may not be included in the 399 chemicals identified in Task 1. While the work completed under the Food Safety Project does include data gaps and associated uncertainties, an evaluation of the data and subsequent formulation of the findings under the Food Safety Project are consistent between the literature review in Task 2 and the crop sampling analysis in Task 3. Also, even with these data gaps, the panel was able to develop recommendations for the Central Valley Water Board. This completes the summary of the data gaps identified in the white paper. The next section of the white paper is related to recommendations developed by the panel based on the findings of the Food Safety Project, independent studies presented during the food safety meetings, and the panel's collective education and experience. A total of 12 recommendations were developed and approved by the panel. These 12 recommendations are broken into 3 categories related to different parts of the Food Safety Project. For the next 3 slides, I will provide the title of each recommendation, followed by a brief description. The first of the 3 categories is related to the current produced water reuse program. Recommendation number 1, discontinue crop sampling. The panel did not find evidence from crop sampling to indicate a food safety or public health concern related to the reuse of produced water for irrigation in this region. However, crop analysis for crude oil constituents and associated additives is complicated by many factors that introduce uncertainty. The panel concluded that given these uncertainties and limitations, crop sampling is less productive and informative than soil and water sampling, controlled plant uptake studies, and other data collection efforts discussed in more detail below. Recommendation number 2, Continue produced water quality monitoring. The panel found that the monitoring and reporting programs adopted by the Central Valley Water Board should continue to require sampling using approved analytical methods. In addition to the current program, the panel suggests that the board use an adaptive management approach in which it continuously and systematically incorporates new information for risk-based decision-making to maintain a current and up-to-date analytical program for monitoring of produced water. Recommendation number 3, continue disclosure of additives. The panel found that the disclosure of additives that are used during petroleum exploration and production enabled the review completed under the Food Safety Project. The panel suggests that the continued disclosure of chemicals will support risk management in the face of changing oil and gas practices. And recommendation number 4, consider new information developed by the Food Safety Project when evaluating WDRs for produced water reuse projects. The panel states that the Central Valley Water Board should evaluate new proposals for reuse of produced water and irrigation, and also for WDR renewals, based upon experience with existing produced water reuse projects and using the information and recommendations developed in the Task 1 through 3 reports and this white paper. This concludes the summary of Category 1. This slide shows recommendation numbers 5 through 8 that are in the second of 3 categories. This category is related to the management of potential hazards from additives. Recommendation number 5, continue evaluation of new additives used in oil operations that provide produced water for irrigation. The Food Safety Project evaluated the hazard potential of additives associated with oil production in the context of reusing produced water for irrigation. The panel suggests that additives not previously evaluated in these reports should be subject to a similar level of review conducted by experts in the evaluation of chemical impacts to food safety and human health. Recommendation number 6, consider requiring the disclosure of mass data for additives. The disclosure of oilfield additives enabled the panel to evaluate the hazard characteristics of these substances and to develop the chemicals of interest list. However, the chemicals of interest list contains many chemicals that may be used in small or large amounts or infrequently or frequently during oil operations. In addition to toxicity and other factors, the hazard associated with a chemical is related to the mass of the chemical used. As such, the panel suggests that the disclosure of the mass amount and frequency of chemicals used would allow a more context-specific evaluation of potential hazards. As a note to this recommendation, Waterboard staff would like to thank the panel for this comment. This issue of obtaining mass data of chemicals for the Food Safety Project was a legal issue related to trade secrets. If Waterboard staff had obtained this information, it would not be disclosed to the panel or GSI since this is trade secret information. In lieu of obtaining the mass data, Waterboard staff required the chemical manufacturers to provide a list of the chemicals that make up each oilfield additive that has the potential to be in produced water reused for irrigation in this region. Subsequently, GSI used a conservative approach under Tasks 1 and 2 that assumed each of the chemicals were present. This conservative approach required a hazard evaluation of each chemical, even if a chemical was not likely to be in produced water due to the limited volume used during petroleum operations. This approach provided a comprehensive review of the complete list of 399 chemicals identified in Task 1. Recommendation number 7, develop a list of additives designated as low hazard. The Task 1 and 2 reports could be used as the basis for the development of a list of additives that were evaluated to be of low human and environmental hazard in the context of produced water reused for irrigation. The panel suggests that compounds that exhibit low chronic toxicity and or are found to be easily biodegradable could be considered candidates for this list. Oil producers would subsequently be encouraged to use additives from the low hazard list, which would reduce the uncertainty regarding the quality of produced water reused for irrigation. And recommendation number 8, work to close data gaps concerning oil additives. The panel notes that the Task 1 and 2 reports identified 91 chemicals that cannot be measured in produced water and 74 chemicals that have insufficient toxicity information from which to carry out an initial hazard assessment. The panel has further noted that environmental fate and transformation product information is lacking for many chemical additives. The panel suggests that the Central Valley Water Board should work with other agencies to close data gaps, which could include identifying or developing new analytical methods and a continued effort to identify or develop new toxicity and environmental fate information on data for chemicals. This concludes the summary of Category 2. The third and final category of the panel recommendations are concerning studies or actions needed to close data gaps. These data gaps pertain to future studies or actions that may not be able to be completed by the Central Valley Water Board, since the required experience may lay outside the purview of board staff. For these items, the panel suggests that the Central Valley Water Board coordinate efforts with other state or federal agencies or private entities as appropriate. Recommendation number 9, conduct environmental studies on produced water reused for irrigation. The panel identified data gaps in the available information on the persistence of oil production chemicals and their transformation products in irrigation water and the fate of these chemicals in agriculture. The panel suggests that the Central Valley Water Board should promote the development of a coherent scientific program to examine outstanding issues concerning the reuse of produced water for the irrigation of food crops. Recommendation number 10, conduct a soil study. A poor understanding of the effects of long-term produced water reuse on soil condition was identified as a data gap by the panel. Either as part of the studies described above or as an independent effort, the panel suggests that the Central Valley Water Board should sponsor a study to investigate the potential accumulation of produced water constituents in the soil or changes in soil characteristics. Recommendation number 11, evaluate the variability of produced water quality used for irrigation. The panel identified a data gap concerning the temporal and spatial variability in the quality of produced water being reused for irrigation. The panel notes that water quality variability is important to understand when conducting water management oversight activities and suggests an evaluation of the variability of produced water reused for irrigation. Recommendation number 12, examine the utility of emerging water quality monitoring methods. The panel notes that the current monitoring plans include the majority of constituents known to be associated with oil production. The lack of validated analytical methods for some additives and potential transformation products has been identified as a data gap by the panel. The panel suggests that the Central Valley Water Board evaluate bioanalytical screening tools and other non-target analyses as an approach to measure the hazard of transformation products and other compounds. As a note to this recommendation and the corresponding data gap, Water Board staff is in communication with the US EPA regarding a potential study that would look at the toxicity of produced water in this region. Specifically, this would pertain to cell biology and acute toxicity. In response to this recommendation, Water Board staff is interested in closing this data gap and will continue to work with the US EPA. To date, Water Board staff has put the US EPA in touch with potential dischargers that would likely participate in the study. If you would like more information regarding this study, Clay Rogers can answer any additional questions at this time or after the presentation.
Josh, can I interrupt you for just a moment?
Of course.
I would like to let the board know that this is Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer, that on this specific issue, I was informed recently that the irrigators will be cooperating with US EPA, and this will be done. It will be important in addressing a couple of the recommendations from this, and that the issues that we do not have complete analytical methods for all constituents, or we have issues with what are the potential daughter products and interaction of different chemicals, is that this will help to address this data gap, in that the US EPA will be able to look at this information. And my understanding is they can potentially identify specific chemicals if there is a toxicological, a cell biology reaction. So this is being done as part of the EPA regional offices, the Office of Research and Development, and it's a regional applied research effort, or the RARE program. and it's being done to evaluate beneficial uses of recycled water. It's one of the efforts that US EPA has been done. So I take this as very positive news. It will help to address the data gaps. And I think David and Solbaher from Coelho Water District may mention this in his comments that he's made to the board. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Joshua.
Oh, no problem. Continue with the presentation. So this completes the summary of the 12 recommendations approved by the panel and included in the white paper. Based on the collective work and findings presented throughout the food safety project, the science advisor and water board staff generated conclusions of the food safety project. On this slide are some of the major conclusions that are discussed in the white paper. These conclusions and others in the white paper have been reviewed by the panel and GSI. Conclusion number 1, no evidence was found that the reuse of produced water for irrigation in this region poses a threat to human health or crop safety. Number 2, many of the chemicals of interest that were found in additives used for oil and gas production were also found to be naturally occurring in crops or are used in agricultural products, such as fertilizers and herbicides. Number 3, the crop sample results indicate that the chemicals of interest in the crops are within the normal range for food consumed in the US. And lastly, number 4, the majority of the chemicals analyzed in produced water reused for irrigation in this region are below drinking water standards were established. As a note to this conclusion, drinking water standards are a conservative value for irrigation water and were only used for comparative purposes, since this water is not used as a drinking water source. This completes the summary of the major conclusions of the food safety project. On 29 January 2021, Central Valley Waterboard staff made the white paper available to the public for comment by posting the document on the food safety page. The white paper, available online, is a draft and has been reviewed by the panel and GSI. Comments for the white paper comments from the panel and GSI have been incorporated into this white paper that is available online. In an effort to maximize public comments, the comment period has been extended from a 10-day review period through 5 March 2021. As of yesterday, by close of business, Waterboard staff has only received 3 comments from the public. For members that do wish to submit comments related to the white paper, please send your comments via email to waterboardsafety@waterboards.ca.gov. This email is also available on the food safety webpage. If anyone is interested in additional information related to the food safety project or reviewing the white paper, please visit the food safety page at the link shown at the top of the screen. Also, if there are any questions related to the food safety project or the white paper, emails can be sent to the email address shown on the bottom of the screen. This concludes our presentation, and we can answer any questions at this time.
This is Carl Longley. Are there any further comments? Do board members have any comments at this time?
This is such a big item. I put a lot of time into it ahead of time, so I don't really have anything public to say other than this was the type of item that as board members who've been on here for a long time know that I was really skeptical about, and I was going to be looking at this very, very carefully. But as this has been developing, I have kept up and I read the white paper, and I feel like I can embrace this better now. I can tell that this is a limited set of facts, and its application is limited to, non-fracking, this soil, this water, these crops. So based on that, I feel like a lot of my initial concerns that I made public have been addressed, and I feel satisfied, and more than satisfied, I feel confident. And so that's a big jump for me because I was kind of in a different camp before. So thank you for the presentation. And I'll say that the expertise of the panel and the different sort of backgrounds that they came from really made a big difference in me accepting this this study. So I'll just thank you for the, I know Clay, you didn't say you put the arm on some people, but I know you made some calls to get high quality people, Patrick. So all that really came together in a way that makes me feel confident about this. So with that, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Carmen. I shared your concerns. I think what is important is that the work continue, and it was pointed out those areas that have to be evaluated. Certainly the study that Clay described really need to take place, but we need more data, and we need to continue to get that data. This is not going to be the only area that wants to use produced water for irrigation. It's going to be a tough decision. It can only be based on science as we go forward. Thank you very much. Any further comments?
Yeah, Dr. Longley, just one quick question to Josh. He made mention of the fact that well, I know earlier when this panel got started, there was an issue about the secrets of the additives and so forth. And I heard Josh say that they were able to get some information on the kind of chemicals that were used in those additives. But my question is, had you been able to get the additional information, the secret parts that are trademarked, would that have made any difference possibly in the outcome of the study or the analysis? Just curious.
Josh, let me answer that question since I was directly involved. Board Member Kadara, that was a difficult decision that I guess basically I made with the approval of the executive officer at the time and our Office of Chief Counsel person. Basically, the issue we had was that had we got the complete list of chemicals for each compound and the mass that was present in each one, there would have been a trade secret claim that definitely we would not have been able to overcome. Had we had the trade secret claim, Waterboard staff could get the information, but we would not have been able, legally, we could not have divulged the information to the public, to the panel members, or our scientific advisor. And so basically, the decision was made that we take what we could get, and we negotiated with the suppliers that we could get the complete list of constituents without the mass. And then, as Josh presented during the presentation, we took a conservative approach. Had we had the mass, we could have said there's such a little mass being used that it would have basically been diluted beyond any potential to be problematic. Under this scenario, we assumed that it would be present in larger concentrations and didn't put that limit on it to try and minimize the potential impact, and basically looked at the toxicology of these constituents based on that. So it's not a perfect world. We took the best that we thought we could get because it was more important to have the constituents than the mass, and we could not get both and be able to be transparent or have the experts review it.
So I think just to add to that a little bit, because it certainly was something that we talked about quite a bit internally. But I think the situation would be analogous to if you to list the list of ingredients on the back of something at the supermarket versus the entire recipe for creating that at the supermarket. If you have an allergy, if you have a health issue, what you really need is a list of ingredients. You don't necessarily need the whole recipe. Although, as Clay pointed out, if the recipe told you that there's just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of that one particular chemical or that one particular ingredient, you wouldn't have to study it. We made the decision that we just want the list of ingredients, and we'll treat every ingredient as if it's present in enough volume that we need a sample for it. We need to consider it a potential harm. So that was a kind of trade-off. And I think the trade-off actually led to greater transparency. We're able to disclose everything because we don't have the formula for the Coke. We just have the list of ingredients that we are potentially watching out for. So I don't know if that explanation helps, but that's kind of where we went with it.
No, it helped. Thank you.
Any further board member questions or comments? We'll now go to listen to a couple of the expert panel members who are with us today. I'll start with Seth Shonkoff. Seth, there you are.
Hello, everyone. I don't have any specific remarks to make. I just really like to thank the Central Valley Water Board for pulling this together. In particular, hats off to Clay Rogers, who really provided tremendous organizational prowess. It's really remarkable. And I would also just like to say that I'm very pleased that the EPA Office of Research and Development study is going to move forward, because certainly these emerging analytical methods, in particular methods that look at the water as a whole from a toxicological perspective, as opposed to individual chemicals, is critical for filling some very significant data gaps that the panel and I came across. So with that, I will end my remarks. Thank you again, everyone.
Dr. Shonkoff, your participation on the panel was invaluable. We thank you for all the hard work you did, and it was all pro bono. That was truly amazing, and you should be greatly thanked and congratulated for that. Thank you very much. We have now Barbara Peterson. Is Dr. Peterson with us today?
This is Josh Mahoney. Barbara Peterson, she was going to be on, but actually she decided to just watch it online, so she won't be participating in the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now hear from an agriculture and oil field representative. I don't see anybody here on the blue card fulfilling that. Josh, who is that supposed to be?
Dr. Longley, I believe that would be David and Solbehair would.
Well, we also have list. Okay, we also have listed. Okay, David, Mr. Ansolbe, are you available?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Longley, members of the board and staff. My name is David Onsolobahir. I'm the General Manager of Coelho Water District and the Administrator for the Permit Holders Group, and I have taken the oath.
Thank you.
Coelho Water District has been using recycled produced water for irrigation of food crops since 1995 under a regional board permit. Coelho has a long history of complying with water quality standards enforced by the regional board. And in arid regions like Kern County, we attempt not to waste any good quality water, and have found that this recycled produced water is of good quality and reduces farmers' reliance on groundwater. And it supports the sustainability of our groundwater basin. Recycled produced water is also critical water resource for farmers and continues operations due to the issues in the Sacramento Delta. So when this question arose regarding the safety of using recycled produced water irrigating food crops in 2015, Coelho Water District voluntarily began crop testing and hired a toxicologist to interpret the data to verify that the practice was safe. And in 2016, Quella Water District began collaborations with the other permit holders and the regional board's food safety panel under a voluntary MOU with the regional board. The food safety panel recommended additional studies to be performed to provide them with data they needed to develop the recommendations to the regional board. All these studies have been funded by the permit holders at a cost of well over $2.5 million. These studies have now been completed and the white paper drafted and submitted to the regional board. The results from these studies and the white paper are that there is no evidence of elevated risk to human health from consuming crops irrigated with this recycled produced water as compared to use of traditional water sources. The food safety panel did identify data gaps, and the permit holders are voluntarily working with the regional board staff and US EPA in performing additional studies to try to fill these data gaps. The permit holders are working with US EPA to fill these data gaps to show that the recycled produced water is safe to irrigate food crops and is a benefit to the sustainability of our groundwater basins. And I'd just like to thank the regional board for working with us to answer these questions and to assist us in verifying that this is a safe practice to utilize this produced water. This is not like all produced waters out there. This is a relatively unique produced water type. And you can't do this project anywhere. It's specifically for here because of the high quality of the produced waters that we receive. And I'd just like to thank the regional board for seeing that and not just blanketing it with a typical produced water quality. We are somewhat unique over here. And I just like to thank all the staff, especially Clay, for working with us and getting these answers out and showing that this is a safe use of produced water for irrigation of food crops. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I have a card from Al Sattler.
Dr. Longley, while we're waiting for just a moment, also, I want to add that I got emailed a couple questions from Mr. Justin Bass that he wants me to read because evidently he's not able to take the blue card approach. So I want to make sure that, assuming that's acceptable to the board chair.
Well, while we're trying to get Mr. Sattler online here, go ahead.
Let me ask the question, and then I'll provide an answer and let the board members weigh in. His first question is, how can we drill for oil and irrigate food crops with the same water and not expect to have a health emergency down the line? And I'll answer that in saying that Mr. Bass, that is the reason we put this panel together, to have experts look at this so that we could follow the science. And based upon what we know about the science today, based upon the history of this practice, it does not appear that there is a health safety issue with it. I will just add that I will make the same commitment that I made to this board back when we started this whole issue. And that is that I'm certain that staff, myself included, I'll actually speak for Patrick here. If an issue came up and there was a health issue associated with the use of this water, we would bring that issue to the board and move immediately to cease this activity. We take human health and the environment very seriously and would not jeopardize people's health. So that, and I'll let the board weigh in if they have any comments.
Go on to the next question.
The second question he asked is, today, February 18th, 2021, is the lack of knowledge concerning the mass of chemicals derived from oil field activities still a potential threat to crop safety and human health? And my comment is, I think we've already addressed that question when we talked about the trade secret at issue, and that we took a very conservative approach when we could not have the list of constituents and the mass both, and be able to share that and have the experts review that. So I think we took a conservative approach where I feel comfortable that the issue has been addressed. I would also invite our science advisor, Dr. Stringfellow, if he wants to add on to that issue any, invite him here to make a brief statement if Dr. Stringfellow would like to do so, or feels that additional comment is needed.
Well, Clay, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I don't have a lot to add, except that I do want to know, as a person who lives in California, really impressed by science-driven policy that's done here. And the fact that the board organized a scientific study, and I've seen in other instances with other issues in California, that I really think this is the proper approach to handling complex problems like this, is putting together panels, getting the experts, getting the data collected, and then in a very public forum, making appropriate decisions about how to proceed. And I think we can't reduce risk to zero for everything, but certainly put knowledge in the hands of the people such as the board that have to make the decisions, and that we do the best possible job we can to collect the appropriate information and put forward any type of issues that come forward are based on science and not just conjecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stringfellow. Are there any further questions? First of all, I have no cards of any more cards of anyone desiring to speak. Some said they would raise their hand. I see no hands.
Dr. Longley,
yes.
there is one, I think, Bill Aliad.
Bill Aliud.
Oh, there we go.
I mentioned that. Thank you, Janelle.
Good.
Sorry, I don't see him.
Mr. Aliud, are you on?
I do not see him.
I don't see him. I thought I saw him earlier. There his card is. Environmental Working Group. Mr. Aliud, do you desire to speak? He does not. Will be speaking.
Not online.
He's not online. He wanted to speak. While we're waiting for Mr. Aliud to possibly sign in, do board members have any questions or comments?
I would just say again, as the new guy, this was an extremely detailed and thought-provoking white paper. I have to say it. The breadth and scope was something that was really impressive as somebody walking into this board, and to have sort of the type of scientific working group that we've had gives me comfort that based on the science, the conclusions are defensible, and that utilizing this produced water is in fact not creating any issues beyond those discussed in the paper for human health and the environment. So very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very valued remarks.
Yeah,
Any
Dr.
further?
Long,
Yes,
yeah,
go
just
ahead.
briefly, I just wanted to, we thank the panel for doing a tremendous job, but behind the scenes was the staff, Clay and his team out of the Fresno office, Rebecca, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he retired last year, if I recall. But all of the staff that worked on this project, it was definitely a worthwhile project for the board to pursue, and I think we've gotten some great results. So want to thank the staff for the hard work on getting this finalized.
Thank you very much, Board Member Cadera. Any further comments?
Dr. Longley, this is Clay. I just received an email that Mr. Aliud said that that the environmental working group will be providing written comments. So I assume that means he will not be able to participate in person today.
I appreciate that. Unless I hear from a board member wants to make a comment, we are going to continue this meeting until tomorrow at 9 a.m. Any further comments by board members? Well, Mr. Palupa, we will see you and your staff tomorrow at 9 a.m. Do you have any further directions for us?
I don't, and I go ahead.
I said, go get your shot, Carl.
Yeah, no, I would add that too. I think that the the one thing I'll commit to the board is we'll absolutely take any comments written, the ones we received here today, the ones we've already received, and do our best to kind of meet those expectations as we finalize this document.
Very good. We're adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. All right, we're not adjourned, we're in recess. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Whatever the wording is. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, I will end this meeting until tomorrow.